Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a weirdly gruesome episode of Monster Party.
Monster Party.
Monster Party.
Animated.
Animated. Yeah, we're talking
limited
cartoons.
I'm-
Oh, man. Yeah,
I'm
Yabba
limited.
Dabba Doom. Oh, yeah. So when I was saying
man.
weirdly gruesome, that's a reference to what, James?
Well, to the Gruesomes, who were a family that appeared on the Flintstones.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, yes, but speaking of Flintstones, who are you, sir?
See, I thought you were going to say, speaking of weirdly gruesome, but no, that's fine. That's okay. I am Matt Weinhold.
I am Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James Gonis.
And for this episode, holy moly. I mean, I know that James has a special love for this topic, and we've hit on it, but we have not even begun to delve deeply into the world that this topic contains. And so, the topic for this episode is HANNA-BARBERA.
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 Woohoo! Saturday morning. Yeah. Doesn't it take you back? Oh, that was a very nice Jetsons saucer sound.
Yes.
Very nice.
You're very
Limited
good.
animation.
You're like the Michael Winslow of Hanna-Barbera.
Yes, and you know, many of us grew up watching these cartoons.
We
Sure. All did.
certainly of a time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
During
Yes.
when we were growing up, every Saturday morning there was something Hanna-Barbera on the television.
For sure.
And reruns.
Right, now
And reruns, that's right.
And Matt, I know James knows a lot about Hanna-Barbera, but I
Wow.
think to cover this, we need a great guest.
We
A
do,
really-
yes.
a
And-
guy who knows Hanna-Barbera.
And boy, do we have the perfect guest. This guest first joined us way back in 2018 on our Christmas specials episode. And I can't believe it's taken us this long to have him back. He is a
It's a crime.
two-time- I know. I'm embarrassed. Our guest is a two-time Grammy Award nominee and Addy Award winning writer and commentator for TV, advertising, publishing, and theme parks. With Walt Disney Imagineering and Disney Marketing, Warner Brothers, DreamWorks, Universal, and the Television Academy.
Whoa.
He's written books. His books include Mouse Tracks, The Story of Walt Disney Records, and Inside the Whimsy Works, My Life with Walt Disney Productions, with Jimmy Johnson. His latest book is entitled Hanna-Barbera, The Recorded History, From Modern Stone Age to Meddling Kids. And I absolutely love it. I was very, very excited about it. I buried the lead. He is also the host of a little podcast called The Fantastic World of Hanna and Barbera. Guys, let's
Nice.
welcome back to the show our friend Greg EHRBAR.
Greg
Right.
Earhart!
Welcome to Greg.
Greg, thank God you're here.
Yes.
We could not have done this without you. And we wouldn't. We wouldn't
Right.
do that to you or our listeners.
But of
That's right.
course, according to Barney Rubble, my real name is Archie Oogly.
Wow, we're already going deep.
Very
Oh,
deep.
man.
Very deep.
So, Greg, I just want to know, I mean, Hanna-Barbera, I mean, we might know them. Some people know them as like a production company, but who were these guys? Where did they get started? How did they come up with this? Can you tell us?
They were both Depression era guys on completely opposite parts of the country, completely opposite personalities, and that's what made them a great team, because they did completely opposite parts of a whole. And when you look back at great accomplishments, a lot of times there's two, one complementing the other. Bill Hanna was from New Mexico. He came from a very close family. His father was a construction engineer. He had a lot of sisters, very musical. He loved writing verse and music, and he actually helped his dad build the Pantages Theater.
No.
Los Angeles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, he loved working with crews. He was very attached to the workers who did stuff, and that carried in to what happened later. And then Joe Barbera was a Brooklyn kid who came from a single family dwelling, and he and his mom worked real hard keeping things together. His dad was off doing a hairstyle called the Marcel, which was extremely famous hairstyle, and there were Marcel curlers and stuff. But his dad, he didn't have the family kind of background, completely different guy. And he was a hustler. He was a street kid. And he got a job in a bank or in a financial institution where he was doing tax things, and he hated it, and he counted every second. And on his lunch, he sold gag cartoons to magazines, which was a pretty lucrative thing at the time, but not an easy thing. So when he got something published in Collier's, that was very, very major for him. They both discovered animation because that was, back in those days, something relatively new, and worked their way up, because Van Buren in New York was where Barbera was, and then he worked at Fleischer, which he called very Dickensian. Didn't stay there very long. He worked at Terrytoons. And Hanna, through, I think, a friend of his sister's, there was an opening with Harman and Ising, in and out of MGM, because Harman and Ising were first with MGM, then they went on their own, then they came back, and he started out sweeping the floor and washing cells. He loved the production process, and he worked his way up to directing before Barbera did.
Wow.
Yeah.
It always amazed me that Harman and Ising partnered, that they met and teamed up, because how harmonizing. What a perfect.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't plan that.
No, and they made the Happy Harmonies cartoons, which were very much like Silly Symphonies. And if you go on YouTube and look and watch To Spring, that was co-directed by Bill Hanna. It was his first directing, and he wrote songs. He wrote a lot of those songs, and there's a song in that. And he continued doing that because most of the theme songs lyrics were by him, and Barbera worked with him on them. They shared credit on it with people like Hoyt Curtin and Ted Nichols and stuff, but those were Hanna's words for the most part. So all of that continued. They got together at MGM and didn't know each other and were assigned to work together, and their desks were facing each other, and they just hit it off and found that there was just something there. And they worked for Rudy Ising in his unit, because they split them. And that MGM was struggling to find a continuing cartoon. I think it was Fred Quimby who came up with the idea of doing the Captain and the Katzenjammer Kids as a cartoon. And that's when Friz Freleng was working there. Now, this is the kind of guys and the kind of company Hanna-Barbera was, which I can't stress enough. Friz Freleng knew them all the way back then. And the last thing Friz Freleng worked on was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, The Pink Panther and Son.
Wow.
They hired him back twice.
Wow.
They were friends. He worked on Hey There, It's Yogi Bear, too. When Warner folded and he was looking for work, he did some work on Hey There, Yogi Bear, and then he started the company with DePatie. Same thing with Tex Avery, who had another animation unit. He was a director. They became directors. Tex Avery came to work for them and worked on Dino and Cave Mouse, and his last thing was the Quickie Koala Show. So these people, Irv Spence worked with Barbera in high school. And you look at an episode of The Smurfs and you'll see his name. They had no qualms about training young people who had great ideas and also bringing in experienced people. And that's why, despite all of the budgetary issues and everything else, there's something about their cartoons that were great.
One thing I could say about Hanna-Barbera cartoons is that growing up with them, you would compare them at some point to the Warner Brothers cartoons, who had a little bit more of the fluid animation. But I thought that Hanna-Barbera hit the sweet spot when it came to limited animation. It was just fluid enough. And that translated into their, the comedic cartoons and the adventure series that they would do. And, when it came to things like Jonny Quest, They would up the animation a little bit, but it was always right in that sweet spot that worked. It was just enough, and you really gotta hand it to them. That was quite an innovation because so many people copied that.
Yeah, and never quite. Well, I mean, I do love a lot of the other company stuff, and we've talked about Rankin Bass and Batty Freeling and all those. But if you look at Warner Brothers' work while Hanna-Barbera existed, that was when Patty Freeling was starting to make their cartoons.
Yes,
and if you look at Walter Lance's work from the '60s to the '70s, that was not the fluidity of the '40s either.
No,
right,
no.
true.
So, when you take the budgets down on any of those things. Oh, and they're showing on MeTV Tunes, they're showing a lot of the new Caspers from the '60s, and they move kind of the way Felix the Cat did, which and some of those King Features cartoons. It's not bad animation, but it's still not the way Hanna-Barbera did it. There was a difference to it.
Right.
So to compare a Chuck Jones or a early Tex Avery or something, or even the early Bob McKinson stuff, then you're comparing what Hanna-Barbera did at MGM with Tom and Jerry, and it's a whole different marketplace. They could take a much more leisurely time making those. The money was flowing. These were major studios. It was the height of Hollywood, and things just changed. And I admire how they rolled with every single challenge, because it was about roughly 50 years that Hanna-Barbera existed in one form or another, and their whole story, if by only a few years, is 100-year story if you go back to when they met.
Yeah, what's also, though, I think strikes me always with Hanna-Barbera cartoons is the incredible voiceover art to it. The voiceover, like the ensemble of character actors acting. Yes, they are completely silly, ridiculous cartoons. At the same time, they had that adult appeal. I mean, when you have, voice cast for things like the Flintstones and Top Cats and Yogi Bear, like it was so distinctive, and they were like true characters, and which shows like the fact that the Flintstones started out in a prime time, slot on television. It was like just another show. It just happened to be animated. It was a comedy show. Yes, it was loosely based on the Honeymooners, but it just had such amazing voice talent behind it, and it really sticks with you. Like Top Cat too, like has such amazing actors in there, and they're so distinct. They stick with you. Those voices just stick with you forever.
So when they changed Alan Reed, the original Fred Flintstone, later on when they would do like Pebbles and Bam Bam,
right,
it was still good, but even the animation that matched the voice of Alan Reed was so perfect, and it really fit his sense of comedic timing, which is yet another thing that they were so good at with their animation, is hitting that timing, which is so hard. I mean, they say that comedic timing is something that really can't be taught, and in a lot of ways it can't. And that's something that is so precise, and they would always nail it.
Yeah.
I think the Flintstone cast of them all, the four original cast, had that. And it people afterwards had that too, but I'm talking about that. Those four people of them all could take any line and make it funnier, and they were already funny. But there's a line Fred says when he's trying to be nice to his mother-in-law, and he says, "You take the chair, mother-in-law, dear. I'll sit on a box." And the way he phrased it made it funny. And Mel Blanc was the ultimate voice. But Gene Vanderpyle and B. Benaderet could just run with those lines and just make them sing,
Yeah.
And to make that come across in animation, though, I'm saying, like the characters and the humor, like Matt said, the timing of it, it's just incredible. It's something magical about it. I mean, Disney Pictures are making this much more fuller animation, like you're saying, but Hanna-Barbera just kind of did something different with it. Yes, it was limited animation, but they made it their own.
Because it was limited and budgets were getting smaller, they couldn't be as fluid. So the emphasis started to be more on characters than action.
Right.
And then it started to become more sitcom-y, for lack of a better word, right?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, these guys understood the importance of having great voices. But Greg, you were explaining how these guys met at MGM. And I guess they worked on Tom and Jerry, where you have two characters who don't speak really.
Yeah.
And then they go on to Hanna-Barbera. How did that happen? They were successful at MGM, but how did they create the Hanna-Barbera world?
Well, the Tom and Jerry thing came about because the Katzenjammer Kids was so unsuccessful. And all of the creative people were tossing around ideas. And Hanna and Barbera said, how about a cat and mouse? And they were like, you got to be kidding. It happened to them so often. You are, that is so stale. That is so trite. And they had an ability to take something that had clearly been done before, but just twist it differently. I mean, they did that with all their shows. There's a million Scooby Doo shows, but they did something with them to make them different. A Funky Phantom and Clue Club and, nobody's kidding anybody, but those shows still were fun. Well, that's what they learned there. Tom and Jerry Jerry Beck, no less, has said Tom and Jerry have never really been off the air. Even Looney Tunes at one point or another, because of various stations changing and Cartoon Network and Max and all, they have moved around. Tom and Jerry still were on Boomerang, and internationally are still extremely popular, and they still do make every so often new. And there was a Tom and Jerry movie in 2021. Which was pretty successful, considering the fact that COVID was just ending. Warner was allowing people to see the film if they had a subscription, but it was also playing in theaters, and people still went to the theaters to see it.
That's
they were
impressive.
able to do it. That's a major thing.
When you go into a modern show like The Simpsons and you look at the cartoon that they're parroting, Itchy and Scratchy is Tom and Jerry.
Right.
Yeah. But Itchy and Scratchy is also Herman and Catnip, because what makes Tom and Jerry different, as opposed to saying, okay, it's a cat and a mouse that fight each other and it's extremely violent and all of that, it's those characters. It is. You talked about timing. Bill Hanna is one of the most renowned artists for knowing how to time things to the nth degree to make every gag work. And then Joe Barbera was great with sketching out a pose. And what's great about those characters are they make these faces at each other that are priceless. And they know exactly how to mine that. They're frenemies. They have this code, this strange, bizarre code. Other characters cannot enter and get in their way. And there's a beautiful elegance. One of my favorites is called Mice Follies, where they freeze the kitchen. And there's lots of beauty in that cartoon, and also lots of violence. They elevated it to the point where it's very hard for people who just say, well, it's just a cat and mouse and I don't want to see them hitting each other. It's not that. It's much more. Otherwise, it wouldn't have survived so long, and there were other cats and mice. So that they won 7 Oscars, and I like to point out more than Meryl Streep.
Wow.
And they won, and they had, I think, almost an equal number of nominations to Walt Disney. I think that maybe the Silly Symphonies, but they are the most successful and most awarded continuing characters of all animation.
Wow. That's amazing.
As far as awards and things like that.
Right.
And with the innovation of combining live action and animation in Anchors Away, where Gene Kelly dances with Jerry Mouse, I mean, Disney might have already tried that, but it was done so precisely in Anchors Away. And then they did it with Esther Williams a little later, years before Mary Poppins, decades before Roger Rabbit. And it's easy to take that for granted now, but you look at that stuff now, it's like, wow, they down to the shadows on the floor. It was beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of the things that's sort of my mission in having worked on the book and all that, and with the podcast, is giving Hanna-Barbera the due for being innovators, because first of all, Walt Disney, according to Gene Kelly's widow, Walt Disney never said Mickey Mouse will never dance in an MGM film, because Mickey Mouse was in 2 MGM films already. What Walt Disney really did was he said, it's a great idea to Gene Kelly. and I will support you. And if you and he offered to contact Louis B. Mayer, who he knew. He never opposed it. He never blocked it. They simply had low staff because of the war. You know, they were doing training films. They were stretched to the limit. They couldn't do it. And Hanna and Barbera were, my theory is they were sort of, Quimby didn't want them to, because they were making the Tom and Jerry's and those were doing well. He didn't want them to go off to this side project. They did it anyway. I talked to J.B. Kaufman, and I don't have data specifically, but the timing works out. Now, when Walt Disney combined live action and animation in Three Caballeros, they mostly did it with rear projection. There may have been some matte processing, but the traveling matte that Albia Works developed was just about that time. And I can't believe, with the precision of the Anchors Away sequence, that they didn't use that process, because how else could they have done it? If you look at that, even though, and I love Mary Poppins, Dick Van Dyke Dancing with the Penguins, that doesn't have the physical contact with the cartoon characters that Gene Kelly, because Gene Kelly was so good at what he, not that Dick Van Dyke isn't, but Gene Kelly was so precise, and they were working really hard on the set to make that really, really work. And when he spins around with Jerry on his leg and stuff, it's incredible, to the point where they got so ambitious. You know, they did the Esther Williams thing, which people don't even remember, and it's like that's an even longer scene. And then Invitation to the Dance, which is an extremely ambitious, maybe not totally perfect, but they tried things no one else tried. And I think Walt Disney, well, of course, they watched each other's films. He looked in the Sinbad sequence and said, okay, here's what I think we can do, and here's what I think where we won't go. You know, moving the camera during the sequence, the combinations is tricky. Stepping onto things is tricky. All of those things they looked at what Kelly and George Sidney and Hanna and Barbera did, and people like Michael Law and the animators and stuff, and they made what Mary Poppins did perfect, because they avoided any of the pitfalls. But because you can see that when you watch, it's like they're doing so much that they really go out of it. But people don't think of Hanna-Barbera in that way. They also don't realize how much animation they did for MGM. You know, Blackboard Jungle's got animation in it. You know, they did that. I Love Lucy's opening titles was them.
But we're talking about like the mid to the late 50s, and at that time, MGM decided to close down their animation department. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes, and everybody knew that change was in the air. The industry knew. You know, Paul Terry's, I believe it was his nephew, and this is in the book The Moose That Roared, the great book by Keith Scott. Alex Anderson, who really was as much to do with the Jay Ward success as Jay Ward was, he was pushing for limited animation for TV too, but Paul Terry didn't want to get into it at the time. So that's when he went off and started working with Jay Ward. It wasn't like they invented it. There was Crusader Rabbit, which was almost like one of those Captain Kangaroo things where you're like reading the story about Ping or something. There was very little animation, but that was technically the first. They just developed, you said it beautifully. They developed a way to do it so that you felt like there was constant movement, even when there wasn't. And part of what they did was use sound, great effects, which were iconic, the best music they could find, or have created for them, and the greatest voices. And a lot of times doing things that, like having crashes happen off screen and things like that. So
it's clever.
You think your mind thinks things were happening that didn't actually happen. Yeah. In that way. There was a couple of other things that they developed too. Television, if you watch a TV show, especially from the 50s and 60s, it's a lot of closer close-ups than movies. Especially movies that were going in the CinemaScope and stuff, where if you see them on TV, you can't see the faces up close. TV was, you know, right here or here. And if you look at what Hanna-Barbera did, especially in the early days, that's what they were doing. In television, you didn't need everything to be moving fluidly because it wasn't an epic. It was an intimate. It was face talks, some action happens. But the other thing they did was they brought animation into, not that we couldn't see Popeye cartoons and Bugs Bunny cartoons and a lot of those theatricals at home, but they brought characters made for television into your home brand new at the time, and you bonded with them. And I don't think they even realized what they were doing. Suddenly you got very close to these characters and they became very real to you. Because with short subjects, it's 7 minutes, it's gags, it's a setup and all, but it doesn't have too much of a continuity. But with the TV cartoons, especially the Flintstones, suddenly you can't do just 26 minutes and just go, okay, let's just multiply it by 3. Suddenly you have to have visuals as well as talking. And that's what the Flintstones developed, because if you watch each season, whether you feel like it got less and less of an adult show or not, you could see how they perfected the system. Top Cat was much more talking, and Jetsons, the vistas of the whole world they lived in was the star.
Yeah.
And then Jonny Quest completely created a genre. I mean, all of them were genre creations. It truly was so much more than many that even I really thought about till I, was doing heavy research on it.
Now, was the Flintstones actually the first primetime cartoon?
It was the first primetime situation comedy.
Situation comedy, okay.
Yeah, because the Bugs Bunny show premiered a few days before, also I believe on ABC in 1960, but it was new animation that framed early cartoons.
Old stuff, yeah.
Right. And Rocky and His Friends was 59, and that was, I believe that was still, it was on early, like early Sundays. It was not really in prime time, and that's still not a 30-minute format. The Flintstones to me is like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because, and this is a guy who also isn't mentioned much, John H. Mitchell, who was the head of marketing at Screen Gems, and I think he eventually ran it. John H. Mitchell gave us Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, The Flying Nun, Hazel, all those great shows. And he really pushed Hanna-Barbera to do this for the same reason Walt Disney went into features. If Walt Disney had made Snow White or it had not been successful, they would have been like the other animation companies. They would have been making shorts and maybe some extended cartoons and stuff, but they never would have been in the serious world of feature-length films. That business-wise, they had to do it. And the same thing with Hanna-Barbera. If they had not gone into primetime with a series that fit in with other series at television at that time, they would have been doing daytime cartoons. And in doing that, they created a form that didn't exist before, and that's what The Simpsons and Family Guy and Bob's Burgers use. And I think all the people who make them would generally agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's not forget the theme song, because there are people out there, I'm sure many Americans can't tell you what's in the Constitution, but many of them can sing the Flintstones theme song.
Yeah, but also it was plot driven. This show too, because it was a sitcom. So again, adults could follow it and be amused by it, as well as kids just laughing at the antics and shenanigans that Fred and Barney get into. But
yes,
and was the Flintstones an immediate hit?
It was very successful. The critics were mixed on it. Barbera never got over the fact that Variety called it a pen and ink disaster.
Really?
What?
Brought that up all the time, but then we don't even remember who that guy and the things. I'm still eating Cocoa Pebbles. What can I tell you?
Right.
Hey, Greg,
exactly.
I was curious, since it came out, the Flintstones came out in 60, right? Was it 59 or 60,
60.
right? Were the first ones, were they in color or were they in black and white?
Well, they did the same thing Disney did. The Disneyland series was filmed in color. the actual segments like Davy Crockett and things like that. The introductions by Walt Disney and the interstitial moments were black and white. That's why when they were rerunning them, or you get some DVDs with them, it's like, why are the credits not in color? Well, because they knew they wouldn't need those later. They would update those.
Because for listeners, back in 1960, not everyone had a color TV set.
Right.
Color TV, I mean, most people, and it wasn't everyone who had a TV set. Maybe it was your friend or neighbor who had a TV set, and it was black and white. So most people saw these in black and white.
Yes, yeah, they were, and like the Huckleberry Hound show, the cartoons themselves were in color. The theme was done in color, but the Kellogg's moments with the characters were not in color because they didn't need to be. But what they did very wisely, and it cost a lot more money. People also don't realize, okay, they don't necessarily move like Fantasia, but they were really expensive. And part of the reason they was because they used color because they knew they'd be more usable later on. So nobody saw color Flintstones until '62, a few days after the Jetsons premiered on that Sunday night, which was the first ABC color show.
Wow. I remember being probably 9 years old and watching our color TV, and a Flintstones rerun was on. And I remember being impressed for the first time in my life at how good color TV could look from those vivid colors on the Flintstones.
Yeah, and they used so many great basic colors, but you know what's really cool now is that getting the Blu-rays of some, and Top Cat just came out, but seeing these shows on Blu-ray, you're really seeing the colors the way they were designed, and they're dazzling colors. And we talked before we began the show about Herculoids and Space Ghost and stuff. These people knew what they were doing. These colors weren't chosen at random. This is really gorgeous stuff when you see it the way it was shot.
It's like art.
Jonny Quest, was that the first one of their adventure cartoons? And then from that point, did they go on to everything else, Space Ghost and so forth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jonny Quest was the first, unless you count maybe Clutch Cargo and there was another one.
Space Angel.
Space Angel.
Oh, yeah, right.
Jonny Quest really, and they were in prime time. Jonny Quest was the first action adventure cartoon, and it still sets the tone. Even shows that are maybe more fluid and all of that, the look of that, the way the stories were told, really did start it all. And that was probably, of all the series, they did the most expensive.
Yeah, Jonny Quest is incredible. I mean, just still holds up so beautifully to me. And it played it like a live action show in a lot of ways. I mean, it was great acting, great visuals. Because to me, as much as when I was a much littler kid growing up, of course, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound. But once I saw things like Jonny Quest and Space Ghost and Birdman, their Fantastic Four series, and the Herculoids, it was like that was just my monster kid heaven.
Yeah,
because I was just into monsters and aliens and sci-fi, and you had these characters, and also two individuals that I realized had an incredibly huge impact on my childhood were Alex Toth and Hoyt Curtin. Yeah. Alex Toth as the designer of so many of these characters like Space Ghost and Hercules, and Hoyt Curtin, who did all the music for these shows. And also, this was before Super Friends. So talking 60s, it was true action and danger and violence and, Jonny Quest and Hodge being shot at with machine guns by bad guys.
It was serious. It was serious stuff.
The aliens that invaded, the Herculoids planet were trying to kill them and destroy them, and like that made things change with the backlash, from parents. By the time we got to '73, the Super Friends, It was like, oh, Superman would tell you how not to go playing in construction
I
sites.
love that.
Don't go swimming alone.
You always cross at corners.
Yeah,
Thank you, Wonder Woman.
yeah.
Bye.
Hey, Batman and Robin. Batman, I know that you lost your parents in a very violent way, but if you have a moment, could you stop by the roadside vegetable stand and tell kids about chlorophyll?
Yeah. And here's Wonder Woman. Here's Wonder Woman to show you a magic trick.
Hanna-Barbera, they were doing what they were told to do.
Yeah,
Look, Congress said too much violence. So look, bless their hearts.
Of course.
They still had Batman and Robin looking cool.
Yeah, but I'm saying that was a distinctive different era. The 60s action adventure Hanna-Barbera stuff is my sweet spot. Yeah. All that stuff I just love.
And also, Sean, you mentioned Hoyt Curtin. And Greg, I was just actually listening to the episode of your podcast where you interviewed John Burlingame, the music scholar, about Hoyt Curtin and the other musicians that contributed to Hanna-Barbera. And it really is a huge part of the experience that I don't think I ever really consciously appreciated until recently. But like the end title of the Flintstones and how, he's pounding on the door. And the end title of the Jetsons, the main title of the Jetsons, this huge, think of the end title of Magilla Gorilla, how the orchestra is just massive. It wasn't necessarily a big orchestra, but the orchestration made it sound massive. And it was like you were at an event. You were at like a showbiz event suddenly with a Hanna-Barbera cartoon.
Oh, you're so right. Yeah. I mean, the Jetsons theme is so thrilling, and that opening sequence is so exciting. It's got everything.
It's almost hard to top, because that was my thing with the Jetsons. As much as I love the Flintstones, and I do like the Jetsons, but I never felt it was as funny or the tone was as perfect as the Flintstones. And so as a science fiction fan, as a kid, I see that opening segment and it's funny and it's space age and it's all this stuff. And then the episode would start and it felt more like just a regular sitcom with some robots and, you could walk your dog on a little treadmill, which that fascinated me. But I do have a question, though, when it comes to the violence that we were talking about from Jonny Quest. It always seemed to me like one of their ways of dealing with making the violence not quite as horrible as to have a comedic moment in the shape of a whimsical pet. And that seemed to go on from that series on. In almost every Hanna-Barbera show, there was either a little dog-like dinosaur in Valley of the Dinosaurs, or there'd be Space Ghost, there was Blip. And so, and then we go on with Wendy and Marvin and Wonder Dog. And it just always seems like, hey, don't take it too seriously, because look, this dog can talk and eat Scooby snacks and so forth. And it's a way of like balancing the two extremes out.
Yeah.
Well, that's absolutely true. And Barbera was sort of notorious for saying, let's add a dog to, let's say the Smurfs, we'll add a dog. But is it formula or is it effective? Because it goes back to the whole issue of you get so drawn into these characters, and why do you? Because you gotta laugh with them as well as go through tough times. If it was just relentless action and nothing else, it's important. To me, it's just like watching. Speaking of the Honeymooners, or an I Love Lucy episode with television, or even the Jack Benny show, the ones that took place at his apartment. They always started out with just miscellaneous business before the story began, which brought you into their world in more of a day-to-day way before the plot started.
Right.
I remember once Mary Livingston asking her assistant, do you know where my emery boards are? It's like, what does this have to do with Jack Benny? It's what Carl Reiner called the realies. And at the beginning of the Honeymooners, a lot of times nothing is really going on for a couple of minutes. And it was the same with the Flintstones. We did a lot of analysis of the Birth of Pebbles episode. And it's surprising to watch because it begins in a gymnasium. And Fred and Barney are working out. And then it has the great gag with Howard Morris as the trainer with the inflated body, which was cartoon gag. So you have the inflate, and then you have him running in with all of the weird food, which that made it a cartoon, or wearing a groove in the floor. It went back and forth. And Jonny Quest had those moments. They'd be at the beach, or sometimes Haji and Johnny were studying, and they'd look out the window and something would be going on. Those parts are really, really important, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Grounding.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned, hey there, it's Yogi Bear. In 1969, and I've probably told the story before, so forgive me, but it's the topic. I was 4, and I went to a matinee. My parents took me to a double feature matinee of Hey There, It's Yogi Bear and The Man Called Flintstone.
Paradise.
Yes. Now, I adore both of those movies, but I have waxed about The Man Called Flintstone a million times, and I can go on. But the thing about both of them is that suddenly you're not watching TV anymore. Suddenly there's actual like animated backgrounds, and they're beautiful. And the music and the songs, they're like Broadway theater quality songs. And one of the songwriters, Doug Goodwin, I'm a huge fan of his, but A Man Called Flintstone opens with this Columbia Pictures logo, only it's Wilma Flintstone holding the torch. And it kills me that on subsequent video releases, because it's not Columbia, they do away with that logo.
Yeah.
I hope that, Greg, I hope you can restore it on Blu-ray and put the logo back in and hire me to do the commentary, because that's one movie I want to do the commentary. But early in the movie, Fred is driving and he makes a hand signal. And suddenly you're in a place with this attention to detail that you never saw on the TV show before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of it, I had to be taken from the theater screaming because, the Green Goose, the villain, terrorized the hell out of me at 4 years old. And subsequently, it became one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. And as much as I love the Flintstones, I love the fact that during the James Bond craze in 1966, the studio made this, spy spoof with Fred, being mistaken for the secret agent and taken to Yurok with the family and Barney and Betty and the kids. And they have this incredible adventure, but it also gets really seriously dark.
Yes.
And I love that now. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Barney gets tortured, because the Green Goose to make Fred talk. And Fred is like, oh, do your worst. And Barney's like,
all you can take and more, Green Goose.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And now I can appreciate it, and now I love it. So I want to, anybody who hasn't seen really both of these movies, I recommend you seeing both, especially Man Called Flintstone. It's genius.
And the sex appeal. The sex appeal in that movie. They're all, as a child watching that, because that was the movie. Apparently my elementary school had one movie that everyone would like. And so anytime it rained or whatever, they'd haul out the Bell and Howell and they'd throw on Man Called Flintstone. And so I watched it again and again, and I loved it too. But I remember seeing those animated ladies, and something changed in me, I think, a little bit. And I suddenly, after school, I had an extra skip in my step, and I had Fred Flintstone to thank for it.
So, Greg, I take it because these TV shows were so popular that it almost demanded that they make these movies? Is that essentially what happened?
Well, Hanna-Barbera, yes. And also they were part of Columbia, which made it, a no-brainer. That was happening a lot at the time. I think McHale's Navy was one of the earliest of a television show becoming a movie, getting to film in color. But Walt Disney did it too, because the big thrill, Davy Crockett had already run, and then they edited the multi-part series into a movie, but it wasn't in color. So to go to see it in Technicolor was dazzling. And you got to figure, even in 66, and especially in 64, still not everybody had a color TV. So that was the thing then. And the other thing they had to do was take the characters out of their, which was kind of like, well, that's not what we watched the show for, but they took them somewhere because they had to open the story up, because it felt, like you said, it felt like a motion picture. It didn't just feel like an extended episode or 2 or 3 episodes strung together.
Well, and to add to the depth about it, because I would kick myself if I didn't also include this, is that by the end of the movie, it's a James Bond type Jeopardy, and that Fred has been sort of resisting the mission the whole time. But then toward the end, he sees Pebbles and Bam Bam playing, and he realizes that if he doesn't save the world, they're not going to have a future. And this was done 50 years before they decided to do it with James Bond, finally, right?
Thank you.
So impressed.
I was going to point out that sequence because that is a you have taken this journey with Fred through this movie, and at one point, it's in some ways I felt like, gee, I wish Barney was in on it earlier. But on the other hand, you wouldn't have had that impact emotionally because Fred is completely alone.
Yeah.
In this situation, he has to make a decision, and then he sees them playing, and then they go into that great "When I Grow Up" sequence.
Love it.
Because what Hanna-Barbera did in their movies, Disney didn't do to Lion King. Unless you count, the package features in the 40s, they didn't break into a graphic tableau when they did a song. They pretty much stayed. They kept the story. Hanna-Barbera went all over the place with it because they were great at the theme songs. So suddenly, Teammates goes into this whole terrific sequence, and Spy Type Guy and all.
And the end titles are run over hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
From a cave.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. I love it. I can't say enough about it.
You are a man after my own heart because I watched Michael Flintstone. I didn't see when it was new. We had a local cinema that showed $1 kiddie matinees on the weekend, and every time Michael Flintstone, and I can remember every chunk that they pulled out of it. To where, and when they showed it on the local station, still was bad 16mm prints. It wasn't until I bought the VHS, which wasn't cheap then. And that's the only way you can see the Wilma. Wilma's at the beginning of the white VHS that Hanna-Barbera video out. Oh. What a thrill to see it all the way through without huge chunks being, like Tickle doesn't end, It's like, but I didn't care. I wanted, and it was pretty cool to see that kind of animation on a big movie screen because it was so base, even though they did make it more elaborate, it was still this beautiful design and very, very Hanna-Barbera. It wasn't Disney, and they didn't try to be Disney. And when just like when Disney tries to be something else than what it's great at, it's the same with them. They're great at doing what they did.
Well, there's all this talk about the Flintstones, and the Flintstones are great. But in 1969, there was a TV show that came out that I couldn't wait for because there was going to involve haunted houses and ghosts, and I'm talking about Scooby Doo. Mm-hmm. And I know we talk about at the end it's always there's like a person. I was waiting for that episode when they're going to get to the real ghost or the real walking skeleton or the real zombie. I waited. I was. Me too. But I mean, what I loved is all the creepiness that went on. Yes, they had a laugh track. Yes, they tried to do the little jokes, but I still loved how parts of it were serious and parts of it were really very spooky. And I remember watching that first episode in '69. I was all excited. Me too.
But like you, I got upset about the fact that it was not really supernatural at the end. I remember after that first episode going, wait a minute. And thinking maybe it was just that first episode.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
Well, now, since then, they've done Real Monsters.
Yes, they have.
Yes, right. Yes, they got my letters finally. What's interesting too is people who are listening, they may not remember when we were growing up in those 60s and the 70s. Times for us to watch these animated things were on Saturday mornings. There was a business part of this. You made these cartoons so kids could watch the commercials for the toy or the cereal or something.
Right.
There was a plan for it. But eventually what happened is kids got so excited about these Saturday morning cartoons. sometimes they would have a special on Friday nights that would show you little clips of the cartoons.
Right.
Remember, there was like a what's on Saturdays, what's new for this year, and I loved watching that. I couldn't wait to see those, to find out what were the animated cartoons that were going to be on your channel the next
the new ones.
Oh
yeah.
And then, you know, after a while, when you get into the 80s, it seems like that whole thing is gone. When cable comes in and you have 24-hour animation, and it's like those magical days when the only time you could watch those things on Saturday mornings, it's gone.
Well, and also by the 80s, let's face it, we were getting a little too old to be excited about Saturday morning cartoons.
Sure, that is true, James.
Well, you mean us personally.
But also, I think, going back for a second to Scooby Doo, I think I appreciated Scooby Doo more later as I got older than I did as a kid.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, what I am a fan of as an adult is old mystery comedy films. You know, anytime like Abbott and Costello, you know, Meet the Killer of Boris Karloff, or any Three Stooges short where they're in a haunted house. You know, and so putting like bumbling comedy characters in a spooky setting. It's kind of a surefire formula. And like you said, Greg, I mean, Goober and the Ghost Chasers, Clue Club, all that, they literally, like you said, they kind of redid the formula with different characters and slightly changed it. But mystery comedies, it's like a surefire formula for fun, you know, and you appreciate the mystery and the solving of it, and the identity revealed of the so-called monster is kind of clever for a kid show.
And that's the one thing that I really do appreciate now, as opposed to when I was a kid, is the idea that it did teach kids to be skeptical. And
true.
that things are not always as they seem. And maybe there really isn't a ghost. Maybe there's a logical explanation. And I think that's great. And I think we need a lot more of that now.
Yeah. Yet they still piled on the spooky atmosphere in those shows, which was great. That's kind of kept you watching.
Yeah, we used to laugh about how at the end, you know, Freddy would just take this little reel of film and say he used the projection to make the ghost. Meanwhile, the ghost would like pick things up and
It made no sense.
And how did they know where to aim the projection and stuff? But it was a. You're absolutely right. It goes back farther than Abbott and Costello. It goes back to the Cat and the Canary, Seven Keys to
Right.
You know, probably burlesque and vaudeville, the haunted house comedy, silent films. The Cat and the Canary was a silent film originally, and it's a terrific movie. The breaking the tension of a scary thing with a comedic thing, especially to kids. It's just like, I always compare it to what my dad used to say: when you have a bad dream, try to make friends with the monster, or laugh at him or something. Laughing at something that frightens you sometimes diffuses it. And the idea of a mystery, you know, you had Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, and then the Whitman ones, Brains Benton, I used to read, because those were the cheaper books. And but you had, and remember Encyclopedia Brown? Those were a blank, because they were 2 pages long, and there would be a little mystery, and then at the end he says, "I know why you did it," and do you know why? And it was like something they said that you had to pay close attention to. So the thing about Scooby Doo was you could pay attention to the mystery or not, but it was fun either way, and because you had Shaggy and Scooby, and you knew inevitably they were going to dress like waiters and have the mummy sit down and serve them lunch, and the mummy would comply. You know, You know? But you also had the formula also was fun, because like in Abbott and Costello movies, the villains are always completely serious.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
Like, you know, they're doing Dark Shadows over there. You know, they're taking it all. But it's, I mean, we all know it's silly, but they're completely serious.
Right.
And then you've got the comedic people sort of almost superimposed over it. And Scooby Doo, you know, a lot of people say, why is it still around? Why? Because it isn't a matter of the repetition. It's that. What is it? What is an Agatha Christie? They're all the same. Book.
It's a comfort. It's a comfort and familiarity to the formula, you know. But within, it's a formula that's strong enough. You can do lots of different little tweaks and changes within it.
Yeah, and it's almost always inevitably they put them somewhere, and Daphne will say, or some. It sure was nice of Shaggy's uncle to let us come to this place in Mattoon, Illinois, so that we, because they had to give you all that. It's like the opening of like a comic book, where it sure was nice of your dad, Veronica, to let us go on this, because they didn't have time to give.
Right.
And what they also did was, after a while. And I've interviewed people like John Semper Jr. and stuff who worked on 13 Ghosts and the later Scoobies, which with Scrappy and all. They were starting to be allowed to play with the fact that format was so locked in, And then I've watched all of the Scooby, direct to videos, and there's so much great humor about, Fred's obsession with traps. And you could build so much from that. And then the ultimate was Mystery Incorporated, which gave it a really good, they did a good job of being true to it and yet expanding on it.
Now, Greg, you can correct me if I'm off base about this, but I have a theory that the genesis of Scooby-Doo originally owed something to the Monkees. And follow me. The Monkees, their music was produced by Don Kirshner, but they didn't want to follow his orders. So they broke from him, and he got really pissed off. So he went and formed a musical group out of the Archies, because his rationale was, if they're cartoon characters, they won't fight me. So Filmation does this Archie show, and Filmation, I guess, is one of the big competitors of Hanna-Barbera, yes. Right? And they get a hit record with Sugar Sugar. So suddenly there's this implication that if you do a cartoon musical group, that they could get hit records with it. Mm-hmm. And so because there was some pressure to make these shows less violent, and they were going to go with the mystery, the idea was to do a music group of kids called the Mysteries 5. And that was the Mystery Machine crew. But it evolved. They decided to do away with the music format and just make it a straight mystery, and then it became the Mystery Machine and Scooby-Doo. Is that sort of correct?
I think that's part of it. There's a gentleman that I was on Stu's show with, Kevin Sandler, who I should also mention another great book called Hanna and Barbera Conversations that he edited with Tyler Solon Williams. Kevin Sandler is working on a Scooby-Doo book, and he mentioned that I think that was among the many iterations of Scooby-Doo, because Fred Silverman was instrumental in Saturday Morning in the late 60s, early 70s. And so he, Archie was his thing. And that's Sabrina came out of him going through the comics and saying, here's this great character. It's like Bewitched. Let's do this. And then Josie and the Pussycats was the same thing. So I think that was part of it. The story is also that Jack Armstrong, they say, was originally Johnny Quest, but that Dobie Gillis was sort of the genesis of. That's why Shaggy is kind of like Maynard and.
Oh yeah, right.
So,
yeah,
that makes sense.
When they develop a show or develop anything, a lot of things get tossed into the mix, and the dog. I don't know if it was Silverman or Barbera that said add the dog, because there wasn't a dog originally in it. And,
really?
And that would have been not quite, it all just sort of clicked.
Yeah.
It's something you can never really predict. And it's interesting how often it happened to Hanna-Barbera for such a long time, because they had, they had great people. Joe Ruby and Ken Spears had an enormous amount to do with that. And it really propelled their career, both in action and animation, to do those kind of things. But they earned their badges working at Hanna-Barbera, starting as editors. And they really were part of developing Scooby. So yeah, I wouldn't doubt that for a minute. I think that back then you had Chattanooga Cats, which was 1969. That was the same year as that was the year after Archie. They also had in 1967, they had the Impossibles.
Yeah.
I love the Impossibles.
And that ties in with the record company. And I think if their record company had lasted at least one more year, they would have been able to release the soundtrack of the Impossibles, because they did make it.
I love those songs. And
There was a show who couldn't dance.
I always thought The Frankenstein Jr. and the Impossible Show, which is 1966, that to me is an interesting transition in the style of animation because it's still a little bit caricatured. It's not quite Johnny Quest or Birdman, but it's also not completely like anthropomorphic characters like Huckleberry Hound or Top Cat. You know, they were a little stylized, but the look and style of the Impossibles and Frankenstein Jr. I love too. It's just got that great kind of 60s retro future, and you know the Impossibles. I mean, anytime you have a superhero named Fluid Man, you can't go wrong. I love those. Again, the voice work in all of those in that show was amazing.
Talking about the pop music, though, correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't there songs in Scooby Doo? They weren't really sang by anybody, but they were like these pop songs.
Second season.
Yeah. And then when you go into the many seasons of the Flintstones, you had a lot of bands, you know, the Beau Brummel Stones and you know, and the Wayouts, of course. I was always waiting for the Wayouts album because that was the music.
We had a spin-off TV series of the Wayouts.
Exactly, right. But so obviously somebody got the message, hey, let's capitalize. And of course it wasn't just 60s rock pop stuff. It was also, you know, Hoagie Carmichael and Anne Margrock and so forth, which I loved all that stuff. I love the idea of putting these famous people. Now, my question is, was that an idea that they had, or did it get to a place where, if we're going to broaden this to just celebrities in general, because the Flintstones were so popular, I wonder if the kids went to their celebrity parents and said, you should be on the Flintstones. Did anything like that happen? Did they get solicited by celebrities?
I think the reason that both Anne Margaret and Tony Curtis were on were because they were making movies with George Sidney. Oh. And in the early days of Hanna-Barbera, he was the third partner, and they alternated who was president. But he was sort of the silent partner, and he and his father, Louis K. Sidney, were extremely supportive of what Hanna and Barbera were doing, and you know, brought them into feature films and got them. They did 2 animated trailers for MGM, one for Pat and Mike with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, and one for Scaramouche. And you can see those on YouTube. You can also see, I posted the She Couldn't Dance on YouTube because I found, by just sheer luck, a demo. This proves there was an album because She Wouldn't Dance and Hitty Hitty Hoo are on a 10-inch demo. So it came this close. But in the case of the celebrities, it did have something to do with that because Anne Margaret was in Bye Bye Birdie, directed by George Sidney, which was loaded with little Hanna-Barbera hints, and they probably did the animation for that as well, because there was put on a happy face, you know, and the
right.
You know, when the thing at the end of the telephone song, and you can see the Yogi Bear soundtrack album in the telephone. So that was all, you know, that was all connected. And Tony Curtis was making a movie with him around the same time. So, you know, on the lot, Hanna and Barbera really had it, in some ways, had it best when they were at MGM, more than any other studio except for Disney. But Disney was an independent, and they were not in the Hollywood mainstream then. MGM was, you know, that was Tiffany's. And movie stars came in all the time to see how animation was done. So they got to know a lot of people as well, and made a lot of good contacts. But as far as the Wayouts, and this is in the book that we'll mention in a moment, that was a group of singers called the Eligibles. It varied, but they were a nightclub act. But their leader, Ron Hicklin, was happier producing and contracting singers for various things. Unofficially, the Ron Hicklin singers, sometimes officially. So on the record albums that Hanna-Barbera made, and the Wayouts, and the Impossibles, it was generally always those guys, or the Megillah theme, or the Secret Squirrel theme. It was always those guys. It was Ron Hicklin, it was Al Capps, it was Stan Farber, maybe Bob Zwirn, and it varied, you know, what the personnel was. And they went on, you know, with different personnel to sing in MASH, and they get credit in MASH. Love American Style, Laverne and Shirley, Happy Days, The Love Boat,
Wow.
They were like the go-to. Even the early Disneyland and Walt Disney World shows, the chorus you heard, a lot of times that was Ron Hicklin's group. And then H Family was also Ron Hicklin and Jackie Ward, who sang for Cindy in Hey There's Yogi Bear. And the Baylor Brothers were the singers, in addition to Shirley Jones. And so those voices were like everywhere.
Yeah.
But they got a lot of their work at Hanna-Barbera, and they kept working with them all the way into the 80s.
Greg, you had mentioned how the Hanna-Barbera, the team, they knew a lot of people in the animation world. I heard a story that there were great Disney animators that actually worked for Hanna-Barbera, which at first I was like, are you kidding? The great animators at Disney worked at Hanna-Barbera? But that is true, right?
You mentioned the beautiful sort of lush creepiness of the Scooby Doo settings. Those early Scoobies, Walt Paragoy was one of their background artists. Walt Paragoy worked on Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and all these, he was a master artist. So if you look at those backgrounds independently, they're stunning. And Charles Nichols was directed a lot of Mickey Mouse cartoons and stuff. He became one of their main directors. He co-directed Charlotte's Web. Iwo Takamoto. He worked on Sleeping Beauty and worked at Disney also. Willie Ito worked at Disney. In fact, you can sometimes you can tell because when they made the features, especially, they had to do them piecemeal. So some sequences were done at different times. The scene in the patio where he has to find Tanya and 50 flighty firefighters, when the first lady, the redhead, who apparently is named Guyla from the trailer, which Guyla was one of the secretaries at Hanna-Barbera, the one who runs up to him, the beautiful redhead who runs up to him, that scene looks like Disney quality. And then when she walks away, it's a little more of a Wilma walk. And to this day, when they do direct-to-videos, they do the same thing. Not everything in the direct-to-video features is farmed out. Some of it is, some of it isn't. For the really crucial animation, they get great Hollywood animators. Dale Baer animated the Slugworth sequence in Tom and Jerry, Willy Wonka. And if you look at that sequence, it's pretty impressive. They give those sequences to the really masters. And then what can be done that isn't quite so demanding might go someplace else. It was the same thing then. And then when Jonny Quest came along, it was even tougher because this was a kind of animation a lot of them were not as familiar with. And they did have some Disney guys. In a way, there's the parallel again. Walt Disney benefited from the fact that in the Depression, there were a lot of artists who needed the work. So we got a lot of artists in there, and it was the place to go. And then all the animation people wanted to go there. Hanna-Barbera benefited because features short subjects were dying, and Sleeping Beauty had underperformed. As they
That's right. That's right. It was not a big hit, right?
Yeah.
Initially.
So
Right.
which is hard to believe. When it first came out, it wasn't a hit, which is weird.
Well,
it's considered
neither
a
was
classic.
Pinocchio because of the war. Fantasia was not. Bambi was not. But what Walt Disney used to do was do the reissues and keep all of his back catalog fresh and return people to it and find ways to keep it relevant and keep it appealing. Even if they updated the promotional stuff, it was the same film.
Yeah, wow.
Well, it's like with Fantasia and Alice in Wonderland when that was re-released in the
60s.
in the 60s, and it was like, hey, are you ready to blow your mind? Go see Alice in Wonderland.
But look, at the same time, though, the brilliance, though, because you're making stuff for typically children grow up, but then there's a new batch of children who haven't seen Snow White or Pinocchio. So there was this idea way back when about re-releasing the film every 7 years or something, 8 years or something like that. So a new generation could see it. And the truth is, no one really knew. No one really knew that was going to work. So that's the brilliance of Disney.
Yeah.
It also seems like you're saying, Greg, the 60s especially seems like such a golden age for Hanna-Barbera because they were at the right place at the right time as far as pop culture. It was the 60s. You had like the spy craze with James Bond. You had color starting to get into people's homes. You had the pop music. Like it all just they were able to kind of take a little bit of elements of all of these popular things and put them into their productions. And it just kind of made them so unique.
They did groovy real well, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, they did. Yes,
Really
they
did.
did.
Talking
They
about
did.
Well, the banana splits.
Yeah.
Oh, live
yeah.
action. They
Yeah.
they eventually formed a live action part of the
Yeah.
company.
Yeah,
That's what the
actually, in
Banana
the
Splits-
early 60s, they started doing that. They were doing live action films that early, around 63, and mostly for industrials and things like that. You can see on YouTube, it doesn't say Hanna-Barbera on it, but I know for a fact they produced it because I went to one of those Flintstone matinees, and all of a sudden, Hanna-Barbera presents The Story of Dr. Lister. And it was sponsored by the Miles Laboratories, and it is this 25-minute drama film with familiar actors like John Hoyt and Sean McClory, and I mean they're all like familiar actors you'd see on other TV shows. But it's about the Dr. Lister developing this antibacterial thing, and it ends up being Listerine. Isn't that a coincidence?
Kids love that. You know what?
Wow.
Kids love the Listerine story.
You know what? I'll tell you. I'm surprised they haven't done Scorsese hasn't done
Yeah. Tarantino.
a 4-hour version.
the banana splits costumes were the creation of Sid and Marty Krofft, right?
Correct.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that the designs, they're very Jerry Eisenberg, I think that they took those designs, but they managed to, Sid and Marty Krofft at the time were like the premier costumers for not only shows, but theme parks.
Yeah.
They were already at Six Flags Over Texas. And they were doing things, Puffin stuff actually predates the show. He was in a Lollapalooza or something. They were doing that kind of thing. So they were the go-to people.
Right.
And so they designed, I don't know if they did the sets or not, but I know they definitely did the costumes. And what happened was NBC was so pleased with that they went to the Crofts and said, why don't you do your own show? And they didn't know how. So they sent their secretary to the store to get books about how to produce TV shows, and they sold H.R. Puffin stuff. And the reason H.R. Puffin stuff is so good, not that their other shows aren't, but H.R. Puffin stuff, they almost went bankrupt making it because it was on film and it was so much more elaborate. According to Mark Evanier, the feature film, the Puffin Stuff film, made enough money because it was done so inexpensively as a movie, that made enough money to save them.
Wow.
Really?
Wow.
Well, like the Banana Splits, I think is one show that I have the most earliest memories of watching as a kid, and on TV. And it was really clever because, again, talk about making you intimately familiar with the characters. Like you're invited into their clubhouse, and this crazy clubhouse that you just wanted to live in and play all day. And then it would show animated Hanna-Barbera cartoons like the Arabian Nights and Three Musketeers, as well as really cool live action shows like Danger Island. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like the ultimate kids variety show in a way.
Yeah.
And I love the Banana Splits, the characters, the designs of the characters. I just love. I just it's great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then adding that Richard Lester Beatles touch to it all.
Yes,
was
the fact that they sang songs, right? I mean, psychedelic sequences too.
And they sang songs that were pretty much up to date. There was, Barry White wrote "Doing a Banana Split" and Joe Levine, and there was a lot of rhythm and blues and psychedelic stuff. I live in a blueberry castle on the bank.
I love that song.
It's like. And that was not being done elsewhere. What's interesting is I know this is a little off topic, but they have the Croft Super Show now on Amazon Prime.
Oh, really?
I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Man.
really?
Oh my
show.
God, I gotta check it out.
And I didn't realize it until revisiting it that's the Banana Splits.
Yes.
Without animation, because each of those segments could have been cartoons, and then you've got a rock band that introduces them. And does
for sure
in between. But that's kind of originated mostly with the Banana Splits.
Talking about people with Disney backgrounds working with Hanna-Barbera, I want to bring up Charlotte's Web, the feature film from 1973.
Thank you.
The Sherman Brothers, fantastic. Mary Poppins, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, so much work with Disney, and Hanna-Barbera doing the first adaptation of this classic book. And I thought, and I still think, that it's beautiful. I think it's a great piece of commercial studio artwork by the studio, but it's so true to the story. And I recently heard that E.B. White hated it. It's like, dude, really?
Well, Roald Dahl hated Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
That's
too.
true.
Oh,
He hated the witches. He told the Jim Henson one. He said that he didn't like that they made the ending happy, and that he was going to publicly denounce it. Authors don't always. There's only so many J.K. Rowlings out there that are like that actually have a role in making the film. Well, the authors generally don't. E.B. White. Well, I gave a whole chapter of my book to Charlotte's Web because I do think that's their Mary Poppins, because that was, and it's not just, it's not that the Shermans and Irwin Costal's presence made it like a Disney movie, because it didn't. Because in every way, it's not a Disney movie. It's everything that Hanna-Barbera did, and it all worked. Because when they made that in '73, they were buried in work and did it when they could. They had a unit for it, but still, it took a while. And that, with all I love its flaws. I love that Lurvy cuts the pancakes and they're there again. I couldn't care less. I love this. I don't care, because to me that is that handcrafted. This is the studio that was grinding out stuff as fast as they could, and yet they made this movie that when I went to see it, everybody was in tears when they walked out, and deeply touched. And the musical score, it's my favorite Sherman score. I'm talking about of all of theirs, and I love everything they've done, but that's my favorite. And I found that stuff. I talked to 3 of the Sherman kids, and I found out how personal that score is. I mean, it really, really personal. It really surprised me, and how even songs like "There Must Be Something More" and "We've Got Lots in Common" were about them. Because as we know now from the documentary, they didn't get along terribly well, and the families didn't get along terribly well. But they had something in common that really, I mean, all of that. That movie was this incredible perfect storm, and the Shermans were welcomed at Hanna-Barbera in a way they had not been since Walt passed away, because they were kind of left adrift after Walt. They were seeing their films getting edited and changed. Bedknobs and Broomsticks comes out with 24 minutes missing. All right, that kind of stuff. It was not a happy period, but they really were involved in the story like they used to be with Walt, and that's why it's such a great movie, because those songs belong in there.
As much as sentimental as it gets toward the end, it was the Mother Earth and Father Time song. As an adult, that makes me tear up now. But I do have a Charlotte's Web soundtrack story.
This is a great story.
Yeah. You're not going to believe this. The Hollywood Collectors Show is an autograph show held a couple times a year in Los Angeles. And one of the celebrities signing autographs was Pamela Ferdin, who is a child voice actress and an actress who had voiced Fern in Charlotte's Web. And I wanted to invite her on Monster Party, because it'd be amazing to have her on. Didn't ever happen, obviously, but it was a thrill to meet her. And I brought the Charlotte's Web soundtrack LP that was still shrink wrapped, and it even had like the cutout farm animals in the back. And I was going to ask her to autograph it, and I showed it to her, and she said, I don't even own this. And I said, oh my God, it means so much more to me that you have it than I do. So I gifted it to her, and I got a free autograph. She signed an 8x10 for me.
Wow. That is a nice story.
That's
a really nice story. And apparently she did some interview for the book. That was the thing she was proudest of, was being in Charlotte's Web. And she is a relentless animal activist. And a lot of it, she felt it came from playing that role, because that movie is about the slaughtering of animals, and it's about a spot for dying, and it's about the value of life. That movie's about everything. It's about life and death, existence, why we're here, friendship, what friendship means. It's about media, because and it's about because everybody's so into it, and then they all like dump it. after a while, the web, and how Charlotte is sharp enough to know, as a marketing expert, how you have to keep that messaging out there, and how Charlotte, there's a part in there where I think it's Mrs. Zuckerman, or
yes.
it seems to me you've got no ordinary spider. No,
Right.
just a common spider. The writers never get credit. You know,
She was the Marshall McLuhan in the story.
And one of the greatest animation performances in the history of the medium by Paul Lind.
Yes.
I mean,
see, I was hoping you were going to bring up Paul Lind. You know, we had talked about voices. Talk about a perfectly cast film with Paul Lind as Templeton the Rat and Debbie Reynolds as Charlotte. My God.
And Debbie Reynolds desperately wanted to do it. She wanted to be in that. She loved the book. And then you got Agnes Moorehead. You know who else was very proud of his work in that? Dave Madden as the old sheep. And he does a fantastic job because he's so stern, but then at the end, not. And Henry Gibson is perfect. And they used Gibson many times after that on the Smurfs and in Tom and Jerry the movie. But my gosh, I quote Paul Lind, and my whole family does. You can't say crunch. You got to say, ha.
That's it. How can you say that word and make it? I mean, the word is crunchy. How do you say that in such a way? Paul Lind says that one word.
Exactly.
I do the same thing.
Wait for that.
Right.
If we're comparing that movie in any way to Mary Poppins, I really prefer Charlotte's Web. And in fact, I think we were talking about the advertising element of it. I feel like it's the kids' version of the 1951 film Ace in the Hole.
Oh, yeah, really. Kind of a little bit of a cynical, dark look at society.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's very true to the book.
It's
spirit
dark,
of it,
and it's sad, but it's not depressing.
No,
and that's what's so beautiful about it. You smile and feel great through your tears at the end of that because of, and when, oh my gosh, I'm going to get verklempt. But and Henry Gibson does it so well, you know, when he says, write this this was the home of Charlotte. And then that'll take us a lifetime. And then he goes, a lifetime? That's what we have. And then he goes, hey, everybody. And then we've got lots in common comes. And you feel lifted, you know. I love that movie.
Yeah.
Me too.
And you know, what's funny is you'll watch it later and go, I don't know. But there is a really nice print of it now. I think it's on Max because it really needs a Blu-ray release because it
hasn't come out.
It's a horrible print.
It hasn't even, so it has not yet come out like in a digital. Really? Wow, that's surprising.
So, and you know what's funny is I think more people saw that from the 80s to probably the aughts than a lot of Disney features because, as you recall, Disney was never going to release anything on video. And so all that they had were features from other studios. And Charlotte's Web was ubiquitous on VHS and on DVD. And then slowly, you know, then the Disney classics slowly started coming out. But Charlotte's Web had a big head start on it. Plus, it was shown on CBS 2-3 times.
Yes.
It was rare. Manical Flintstone wasn't, but Charlotte's Web was. And so much as I love it, I mean, they didn't show animated features on Primetime Network very much. Because I don't know why they didn't. And so Charlotte's Web had a lot of people got to know, just like Willy Wonka. That was not a hit, but once it was on TV and it was on cable, and people, you know, you saw it. It was like Wizard of Oz. You know, having it on your screen was different, and you know, and Charlotte's Web was like that too. I think they're missing a huge thing by not reissuing it.
If you're looking for better copies of any of these movies, you should also try archive.org because sometimes you will get stuff from there that it's either a foreign release or somebody will have upscaled something. So it's not perfect, but at least it's better than a degraded VHS or something that's, you know, a couple generations down.
We've talked about some great Hanna-Barbera stuff, but, you know, like every studio, sometimes you may try something and it may not work or irritate
Here we go.
the kids. And, two things. I'll throw it out quickly. Okay. Kong Phooey. Okay. This dog, he's supposed to be, be a ninja guy, but it's like everything he does, it's like it doesn't help catch the criminal. His cat is always the one that catches the criminal. And once the criminal gets captured, Kong Phooey goes, well, I'm just such an amazing, and it bugged the hell out of me.
God, it kind of sounds like a comedy.
No, it's, well, not just that, but also when you do a show called The Great Grape Ape, okay, I envision a giant King Kong creature that's like rampaging through the town. And instead I get a happy guy with an ape with a cap that just has a speech impediment and he keeps repeating
Again,
himself.
sounds like a cartoon to me.
Oh, you mean like Groot?
Yeah, really.
Well, I'm just saying that not everything was brilliant, and it just.
I think that's an opinion, and I think that Hong Kong Phooey.
What, Matt? You don't agree? You don't.
No, look. I think it's strange that Hong Kong Phooey, you're led to believe that maybe there's some sort of Asian connection possibly to this, and it's voiced by Scatman Crothers. Okay, well, all right.
Okay,
It's a little confusing. But then you cut to the amazing Chan and the Chan clan, and there you've got diversity at least. Sure, they were not all voiced by Asian people, or
they weren't, but they tried very hard to get as many as they could cast.
Well, there you go.
Which they didn't have to do. They didn't have to do it. First of all, same with Globetrotters.
Right.
They didn't have to do that. And if it was done today, there'd be press releases about, look what we've done.
Right. Well, yeah. Well,
yes.
Just because it was, it's the right thing to do.
What was great about the Amazing Chan and the Chan clan was that they actually, it was some nice kind of symmetry in that they cast Key Luke to do the voice of Charlie Chan. Key Luke was #1 son in all the Charlie Chan films with Warner Oland. So, I mean, that was really cool. And of course, in the cartoon, all the kids played in a band.
Of course.
Well, of course.
But see, that's what I like about some of the later Hanna-Barbera series were so bizarre in their concepts. Like, for instance, Jabberjaw. Which was like not only was it kids solving mysteries and playing a band, but the drummer was a shark on land that talked.
What does he eat?
What talked like Curly from the Three Stooges? What?
John, what does he eat?
Hey, what Jabberjaw does in his off time is Jabberjaw's business.
And yet, I want to see a $200 million live action version of Jabberjaw. I think you could do it now.
Sean, I was waiting for the moment when they were going to come into a room and Jabberjaw has just torn a person in half.
Yeah, that would be the dark version.
I was hungry.
It was just such a strange concept, So again, the later ones sometimes got so bizarre that I kind of enjoyed them.
Okay. Speaking of which, I just have a quick question for you, and that is, were the Hair Bear bunch, were they hippies?
They were CBS hippies.
I see. Okay, got it.
I love the Hair Bear bunch. First of all, it sounds remarkably like my last name.
True, right?
Which my dad got a kick out of, and also because it was probably their first like throwback series that was kind of like Yogi Bear, only grooved up for the 70s. So you had the trappings of let's do something that looks like this, but it still was they're escaping from the zoo. But you also got their modular cave with all of the gadgets in it. So you had that kind of stuff, and you had a great voice cast. You had Dawes Butler and Paul Winchell and John Stevenson and. Oh my gosh! That was the first thing I think that Joey Ross did for them.
Right,
right.
But I really enjoyed that, and I also think that when you talk about convoluted, I can't figure out why they did this kind of premises. There's two things to keep in mind. First of all, one of the glorious things about Hanna-Barbera cartoons is in this era of everything being explained for you, especially with prequels and midquels and
right.
you didn't get any explanation. You got 60 seconds to get the time, and you're done. And that's it. You know,
that's my problem.
But I love that because I just wanted to just sit back and just be entertained, and I just thought it was fun. Sometimes it was so dumb it didn't matter. The other element to keep in mind is Joe Barbera was such a salesman. You know, he'd go in and the famous Pebbles story. There was a cave boy, you know, originally, and they're in Golden Books, you know, the Cave Kids and all that.
Right.
Fred Jr., and that's what he pitched. And then Ideal Toys said a lot more dolls, female dolls sell than male dolls. Guess why there's so many princesses and so many conquering maidens in so many of the feature films we see nowadays? Just saying.
Right.
It's not by accident. Well, what Barbera said in the meeting was, did I say it was a boy? It's a girl. It's like, you know. So he would go in, and the classic story is Casper and the Angels, which is the most bizarre premise.
Now, what is that?
Casper lives in the future with this goofball ghost named Harry Scary, who gets into mischief, and that's John Stevenson doing an Ed Wynn voice, with two sort of Charlie's Angels kind of police ladies, and they solve crimes. And Casper and the Angels. Now, here's what happened. I sound like Monk. Barbera goes into a meeting with, and I've been in meetings like this with advertising, where they think it's a buffet. I'll take the carrot salad and mix it with the gravy, and then take some of the pudding and put that in, and you'd say, but these are three separate. Yeah, but I like this one and I like that. You know, that's what they would do. Well, he goes in with basically a Chips kind of cartoon. Boards and keyframes, and a Casper treatment because they just got the contract with Harvey to use Casper, and I guess a Charlie's Angels or something, which we had Captain Caveman and a Teen Angels. And
that's right.
So, you know, had that too. So angels were everywhere. And so what does NBC do? Do all of them. And that's what happens. And that's why you have that convoluted, why in the world would this be? You know, Kung Phooey was originally Kung Phooey, but they couldn't say Kung Phooey because of the David Carradine show. But that was where it started, and they didn't know what animal it should be or what he should look like, and they landed on a dog, and you know, and he's pitching and he's selling, and they cast all kinds of people to play the lead, and Scatman Crothers was in the building for something. They said, let's have him read, and it was just cool. It was like, there's no real reason why. It just works.
Well, that's another example, though, of Hanna-Barbera being smart. Like, just cast a great voice artist.
Yeah,
I love it. It's like Scatman. Do your Asian voice. Yeah, all right.
He wasn't being Asian. He wasn't being a. And when
he wasn't being Asian. He was just a dog that knew
Scatman. He was
Kung
just this
Fu.
dog.
And it's got a great theme song.
It does.
Oh,
it
yes,
yes, it has a good theme song. But you know, I hated having that lunchbox. I actually hated
I had the lunchbox.
And I remember ditching it, you know, because I hated it so much.
Oh,
but talk about like the crazy concepts. Like, was it Hanna-Barbera did the animated Happy Days thing where Fonzie travels around in a time machine?
Yes.
Fonzie in a time machine. Like what?
Well,
I bought it.
Not going to do. See, what Filmation might have done a straight. You know, which would have been fun. Like they did My Favorite Martian, and it was still a sitcom.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't change it much.
Brady Kids. They did the Brady Kids, too.
I thought it was kind of good. Yeah. Hanna-Barbera, they went wherever they would go with it. And I guess they figured, you know, besides, they didn't have the full cast. You know, they had the four male leads. And they probably pitched all kinds of things. And they ended up with, but what a cast. You had Dee Dee Khan as Cupcake. And you know, the girl from space, which, you know, what a great voice she had. And then you had the original cast, and then Laverne and Shirley in the Army was kind of a spinoff of what they did on the nighttime show, because they had at least two of them in the Army.
Yeah, kind of Sergeant Benjamin kind of thing.
Yeah, and so that's Private Benjamin was another
Private
thing.
Benjamin, yeah.
You know, and that's the other thing to keep in mind too, is they were in television. And Fred Allen famously said, I believe, imitation is the sincerest form of television. And if you look at TV shows, they pull from premises and they mix and match and they pull from premises. When Animal House came out, every network had a frat show.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's what television does. And they were doing exactly the same thing. They were looking at what's in prime time that we can make fit in prime time. And Walt Disney did that with Disneyland, and this doesn't come from me. This came from a guy named Jim Corcus. Disneyland has 4 lands and Main Street. Main Street's basically this gateway into another world, but it's also like his hometown, and it's sort of town and all of that. And then Fantasyland is based on the Disney movies. Okay, but the most popular things in 1954-55, Westerns, adventures, and outer space movies, on TV. And that's what Disneyland was. It's not an accident that those things get chosen that way.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, they made stuff just like everybody. Flintstones, they never lied about it. They never said, we are artists. We do not do ripoffs of the Honey. No. Hannah said, we wanted to pick one of the greatest comedies that was on, and it's a great show. And what would work in animation, they never concealed it. It was in the press at the time. They say, oh, well, Jackie Gleason was going to sue, but then he thought all kids would hate him. Excuse me, Philip Rapp sued Gleason because The Honeymooners was a lot like the Bickersons.
Right.
And Philip Rapp settled out of court, which means he had a case.
Whoa.
But if you go back to Laurel and Hardy and Sons of the Desert, just like Top Cat, it's Bilko.
It's Bilko.
Yeah, it's Bilko.
It's the writers and a couple of cast members, but to me, it's more like Pocketful of Miracles, which was Lady for a Day.
Lady for a Day.
There's a lot of Damon Runyon, lovable rogues, and a lot of Bowery Boys and East Side Kids. It's all of those things.
They've been making Top Cat features in Mexico now.
It's huge.
And I was like, why are they making Top Cat movies? I had to look it up. It's because the original Top Cat series was so well dubbed in Spanish. The Top Cat was a huge hit.
Really?
In Latin America. So now they're continuing it. They're making new Top Cat movies. And I may not watch the whole movie, but I will watch the opening title.
Wow.
And it just goes to show you how brilliant Scatman Crothers was. He could do any language.
So, Greg, I know that when pop culture spit something out, Hanna-Barbera was there to capitalize, like the Smurfs, right? Didn't they do the Smurfs?
They did the Smurfs,
in
yes.
the 80s and stuff. But there was a time, where was it when Hanna-Barbera, when the team said, hey, I think it's time to just sell everything? I guess it was sold to Warner Brothers, or what was?
Well, but I thought, wasn't it first in the 80s? It was Taft Broadcasting, right?
Is that what it was?
It was
First.
in the 60s. They sold it to Taft in about 67.
Mm-hmm.
They were sort of at a crossroads because the contract with Columbia had ended, and Columbia was considering buying. And there is video of Charles Fries, that was the head of Columbia, and saying that it was the dumbest thing they ever did was passing for it. Was only a $2 million difference. And they passed on it. And he said, we spent years chasing after all the other animation studios, and it never worked, and we should have hung on. And that was before Scooby Doo, so they really kicked themselves. But Taft bought it. Hanna and Barbera were already well into their 50s. I mean, they thought they were going to be at MGM forever. Right. Part of them knew, but part of them thought, how could this possibly happen? And I don't think they ever really got out of it, get over it. That's why they let people come back, and they let a lot of people work till they literally dropped, because they didn't get rid of people, and they didn't hold grudges about, oh yeah, come back, we need the work. People would go and come. There was not a whole lot of ageism, about if you were good, they needed you. There is a great, in this Conversations book, there is a whole chapter by someone, and I could never find his book. So they located the essay about how the sale was done, and there were people who championed it. And what I didn't know until I read it was they were making, just like the Crofts in a way, because this was all experimental. No one had ever done these things before. Almost all their series were way over budget.
Really?
And yeah. And part of the reason that the Jetsons, Top Cat, and Jonny Quest only lasted a season was because unlike the Flintstones, which was the first and had the momentum of a train with merchandise and everything already built in, like the Simpsons still does. Simpsons stays on because it sells stuff just as much as it's popular. Flintstones had that going for it. And then after a while, ABC didn't need it anymore. You know, ABC was gone on to other things, and they could spend less money and get the same ad revenue with a live action show. So Jetsons, you know, was on against Disney and like Lassie and Dennis the Menace, and it's like you could put a sitcom on, and the most expensive show they did in the '60s was the New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Oh yeah, that was quite groundbreaking too, combining live action with animation.
The first one, and it was extremely expensive. And you look at that now, and every episode has a different color scheme and a different design. I mean, it was over the top for TV. And it was on actually before Disney, but it wasn't pulling enough for what money it was costing. And you know what NBC replaced it with? Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, which cost a fraction.
Nothing,
of money. So what Taft found out was that they were in the red. Even though their assets were, you know, they had these characters and all this stuff production-wise. And that's one of the reasons you saw changes over the next few years in their production methods and things like that, too. And plus, Saturday morning doesn't have the budget nearly that primetime TV has. Right. You know, so they can't afford sometimes even musical scores. You know, they'll borrow from this or that. What you mentioned, the first episode of Scooby Doo, that's fully post-scored. And if you watch it, the music matches exactly, but then they'll use that music everywhere else.
Right.
Yeah, you saw that a lot.
The musical version of what Filmation would do with animation.
Yeah. Well, they did it. What they did is, as soon as a series had a bunch of musical cues, it would just go into the hopper with all the other stuff. And the editors would use it at will, however they wanted to do it. Same with the sound effects. With Huck Finn, there were at least 3, maybe 4 episodes that were also post-scored, very expensive, and that was Ted Nichols. And that music you heard also on Scooby-Doo, Josie, Super Friends, and, you know, things like that.
Just to clarify, the Huckleberry Finn shows, is this the one that had the, so it was live action with animation, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first time I ever saw that was as part of the Banana Splits.
Same here. That's where I saw it.
You saw it in syndication. Yes, Banana Splits and Friends had Gulliver, had Huck Finn, had Banana Splits episodes. A lot of people saw it then and appreciated it then because it didn't get much of a chance on the network because of the cost. They promoted it and all that. They tried, but they were ambitious. They wanted to do grand things, but the business, you know, and staying open also was kind of a thing. They wanted people to be working. And so then when Taft came along, they found out they had, but what Taft also gave them was theme parks because they were in that business, and that brought them to Kings Island and then later to King's Dominion and Canada's Wonderland. And then suddenly the characters and the rides were in that. So Taft wasn't necessarily the worst thing that could have happened. And Taft was bought by Great America. Ruby Spears was bought by Taft. They ended up pretty much being the same, even though they were separate at first. And Great America bought it, and then that folded, and then Ted Turner bought the library in the 90s.
That's it. Okay.
Well, that to me, talk about how Hanna-Barbera just kind of found new audiences and new generations. Because I remember when Boomerang came on and the Cartoon Network, these are like, wow, you know, whole channels, 24-hour cable channels that show classic cartoons. I mean, it's like wow, I could watch like Secret Squirrel again, you know, like it was just really cool, you know, to see that stuff still alive and a whole new generation of younger viewers experience it for the first time.
Also, the international appeal. The international appeal of a lot of these cartoons. It's funny, like I've been to Japan a number of times. I went with these guys and we had a wonderful experience. And when you're walking around and you're shopping for toys as we do, you find these things. It's like, oh my God, I had no idea this particular thing was so popular here. Like the Wacky Races seem to be very popular there. And I love that show.
Yeah.
But I don't remember seeing any kind of merchandising And
No,
then I go to Japan and there's all the little figures and all kinds of stuff. And it's amazing. It's amazing how, where James was talking about Top Cat in Mexico and how these certain shows find their audiences in these other countries and keep the franchise going.
Top Cat was very big in England too. And it was called Boss Cat because Top Cat was a brand of cat food.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not surprising to me that Top Cat is popular because they also love Bilko.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It is very much like a British sitcom, and it is very verbal. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah. I love those shows like the Top Cat, even Flintstones. Like you could just listen to them like radio shows.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. It's that entertaining, just audio wise.
Yeah.
You know, Greg, it's funny how we're mentioning these characters and stuff. Who would have known that years later that a lot of these shows would be iconic and would be considered a property that you can make a live action movie? Like Flintstones was made into a live action movie. Scooby Doo was made into a live action movie. And it's funny how where a lot of the stuff has gone, and now it's a property. It's a property to be exploited, or you know, like anything. But I was curious about the stuff that we liked. Are people really rediscovering it today? Like now that it's been, you know, it was sold to Warner Brothers. I'm not sure like if Warner Brothers still holds on to the property now. But are people going to be checking out Secret Squirrel or something like the Flintstones?
I think, first of all, there's MeTV Tunes, which is very encouraging. And they're showing Secret Squirrel, and they're rotating it with Adamant. You know, they have a really smart way of handling, because these shows, a lot of them, especially Saturday morning, they'd made 16 or 17 because that's all the network would let them make. And then the following season, maybe 8 more, 6 more, unless they developed a new format, which is why they did like Josie and the Pussycats in Outer Space. Instead of making 8 more Josie episodes, they got to do 16 more. And they could promote it. You know, they need something they can promote and market as a new thing. So there's not a lot of their series. So what they're doing is kind of stacking them. And so you get Adamant for a couple of weeks, and then you get Secret Squirrel. And what they're doing with a lot of on Sundays, they have the different Flintstone iterations just on Sundays, or that they're showing like Yogi now, and they had Yogi's gang before. So it's like that's Yogi's place, but it's the different Yogis. The other thing they're doing is Super Friends is starting in a couple of weeks, and that's a very long running, but they kept changing the format. Right. It was one of the toughest things to get on DVD, not because they didn't release it, but it was hard to figure out, okay, what season is this?
Well, that's a good point, because that's the thing about the original Super Friends, how we talked about the no violence, they have to help kids' morality, but then that changed with like Challenge of the Super Friends, the legendary Superpowers show, Superpower Galactic Guardian. They got suddenly back to the actual like supervillains trying to take over the world and kill everybody. They were allowed to do that after all the worry about violence subsided. They got back to being a little hard-edged, kind of, you know, superhero shows. Yeah.
So you can string them all together, and then you have a series, and they're showing all the Jetsons. You know, they've just circled back to the original 24, but they're showing the 80s ones all together. So and of course, Flintstones has about 166 episodes, so they don't have to worry about it. Top Cat only has 30, so that's like Saturdays and Sundays. Josie's just on, I think, Saturdays. So some stuff, Wait Till Your Father Gets Home is on Sundays. So it's being done and Wait Till Your Father Gets Home is another show that Family Guy owes an awful lot to. And watching that now, not only is it impressive how edgy it was and how different, even though it's like All in the Family, it's not like All in the Family, because he wasn't Archie. He was somebody desperately just trying to stay in the middle of everything, not because of extremes. And there's some brilliant comedy in that, and a lot of asides, the way Family Guy and Simpsons do it, you know, little dreamy things and stuff. But what's cool about it is the Marty Murphy look, which took over like Kong Phooey and shows like that, where they had different looking characters, but it worked real well for Hanna-Barbera. Wait Till Your Father Gets Home looks like a New Yorker cartoon come to life, because
Yeah.
the backgrounds aren't bleed, everything's vignetted and stuff. And seeing it now, it's like, this is a pretty cool show. And when I watched it, it was syndicated and they got a 16 millimeter print and all, so it's like, and Smurfs, they just put Smurfs on Max 2 seasons. It would be nice if they had all 9, but those look astonishing. I mean, the quality of the lines and the colors, it's a gorgeous cartoon.
Yeah, but I'm thrilled that MeTV is actually showing some of these classic ones that we kind of grew up with. There's another reason to watch MeTV. In addition to watching Collector's Call, you can also watch classic Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
And it isn't, we didn't have MeTV tunes in our area, so we got Friendly, which is pretty much, and it's funny because we just lost the Boomerang app. The Boomerang app was about $6 a month. And because I like the fact that they had Galaxy Goof Ups and, things that aren't on anything and were never put on video and DVD. And Boomerang went away, the app. And Max didn't apparently, or maybe they will, but they haven't picked up all those shows. But buying MeTV through Friendly TV is about $6. And Friendly TV has a whole slew of stations. They have Old Movie Channel, Old Westerns Channel, but they also have MeTV Plus, which has additional older shows on it. There's like Westerns and like Hawaiian Eye and all of these things that I'm like, now I'm keeping track of the stuff that's not on MeTV, because I haven't seen Hawaiian Eye since I was a kid, but I want to wait till they get to episode 1. Just like they have Fugitive, they have all, like, thanks to MeTV, I finally got to see Land of the Giants, because I didn't see it much when it was new, because it was on Sunday night and Disney was on, and I thought, well, this is not Lost in Space, and I didn't appreciate it. It's a great show.
It's a great show.
To TV, you can see these things, and the Friendly TV isn't a very high price to pay to get the tunes, because now it's like, now I don't want to, if we do get MeTV tunes, normally I don't want to give up Friendly TV. I've gotten very attached to seeing The Flying Nun on one, followed by Gidget, and it's paradise.
Do you ever watch Pluto TV? Because Pluto TV is free and has a lot of older TV stuff on it.
Yeah, that's a good one, and I like Crackle did have stuff, but it all disappeared. They had the Genie cartoon and the Partridge Family 22,008. Okay, there's another example. Why the Partridge Family in the future?
Why not?
Because it was supposed to be Elroy and Judy, and it was going to be a teen show the same way Pebbles and Bam Bam was. And somebody probably said, the Brady Kids is a huge success, and the Osmonds and the Jackson 5, and it's like, okay, they have the Bradys, and CBS will take the Partridge Family, throw them in the future. So they tossed out Judy and Elroy, and suddenly it's,
Well, yeah, it's also if Filmation gets the Brady Kids and Rankin Bass gets the Jackson 5, well, okay, we can have the Partridge Family, and hey, let's put them in space, because Gilligan's in space now.
That's right.
Everybody's going to space.
Everybody's going to space.
That's so funny.
Guys, I just have to take this opportunity, and I apologize in advance, but I have to tell you my Flintstone joke.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Fred and Wilma, sometimes they don't get along, and Fred did something really stupid. He really screwed up, and Wilma just couldn't take it anymore. So she threw open the china cabinet, and she threw every plate and glass at Fred. And Fred was ducking all these plates and glasses, and they're smashing against the wall. And then after it's all over, things cool down. Fred apologizes. They pick up the pieces, and the glass, because there's little shards of glass, and they live in this boulder, the shards of glass some of them are really tiny shards, and they're stuck in the wall. And they're, this is a safety hazard. They're afraid that, Pebbles might get hurt, but they don't know how to remove them. So they figure, okay, let's call Barney over. Maybe he has an idea. So Barney comes over, he takes a look and says, gee, Wilma, people who live in stone houses shouldn't throw glass.
Wow. That was a long build up to that.
Wow. You know what? How many years have you been working on that? I'm just curious.
I did apologize. I apologize.
I loved it. And you know what I really loved about it? The presentation.
It was fun.
Fantastic.
So Greg,
Keep 'em coming. If you got a Hong Kong Phooey one, let's go.
I'm so glad you brought up that joke, James. Thank you so much.
I
You
couldn't
have-
have slept if I didn't.
You know,
Do you have a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids joke?
It's a testament to how influential these characters were that we have had revisionist treatments, especially in the 90s and the 2000s. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring some of them up. Space goes coast to coast on Adult Swim.
sure.
Great. Brilliant.
And in particular, Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law on Adult
Yes.
Also great.
which did a spoof. They had the Jetsons on, which was brilliant. And they did a spoof of Fred Flintstone as Tony Soprano, where they emulated the opening of The Sopranos perfectly.
Lots of
And
great in jokes and Easter eggs in those shows.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And in 2018, DC Comics did a line of satirical comics written by a writer named Mark Russell on the Flintstones, where it's like they're not as cartoony; they're a little bit more realistic, and it's straight satire, and some of it's really, really funny. The breakout one was one that he did on Snagglepuss called Exit Stage Left: The Snagglepuss Chronicles, where Snagglepuss it's in the 1950s, and he's basically Tennessee Williams. He's a gay playwright, and he's being pursued by Joseph McCarthy, and he's friends with Huckleberry Hound, who's closeted, and then he gets outed and he hangs himself. Quick Draw McGraw is also gay, and this actually became a very, very well known, among this was celebrated in the gay community. It's won awards, and it is brilliant from what I've seen of it. I haven't actually read it, the whole thing, but I'm fascinated with these kinds of revisionist treatments. And then finally, you got Robot Chicken and Family Guy, which periodically tackle the Flintstones and other Hanna-Barbera. I'm sure they actually probably did do Jabberjaw eating the whole crew at some point.
Right.
And there's one Robot Chicken in particular where Fred and Barney are fighting over the Fruity Pebbles. And Barney just decides to kill Fred. He murders him, but all the animals that are working as appliances, they witness it. So Barney has to kill all the It's some brilliant stuff, and just most of the stuff is on YouTube too. So I recommend anybody check it out. It's good.
Well, today, like in Hollywood too, everything is the IP and the intellectual property of what can we remake or reimagine, sell again. That's why, I'm surprised more Hanna-Barbera classic characters or shows maybe haven't been developed. And maybe they are. They're just kind of still in development hell. But I still think if in the right hands, with a filmmaker who loves the source material, if someone could do a live-action Jonny Quest movie set in the 60s, I think it could be incredible. It could be like an Indiana Jones-style adventure, but it could be great. And I really want to see a live-action CGI Herculoids film. That could be amazing.
Yeah. Well, Venture Brothers is Jonny Quest.
True.
And then as Godzilla fans, Godzilla, right?
Oh God, that's right.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, I had an issue.
You had an issue?
Yeah. Well, there was Godzuki, and
Godzuki, yeah.
Yeah, but Godzilla,
terrifying.
Godzilla teamed me up with the science family.
Okay.
That was cool.
Yeah.
That stuff was cool.
But look, this is what irritated me was Godzilla didn't have his famous Godzilla roar.
Yeah, I missed
heard
that.
The story how the guy who actually does the voice,
Ted Cassidy,
he actually did a bunch of growls and stuff for a different show. And they just happened to have it go, hey, let's use the growls from Ted Cassidy for Godzilla. So I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. I like to look at it like a photo of it.
Yeah, I like the monsters he fights. I mean, I like all the action sequences are cool.
Well, just like they did Shin Godzilla, I want to see a Godzuki done in that style.
Right.
Deadly serious, but with a little sort of a Strangelove satirical element to it. I think that would be great. Godzuki is a character that hasn't truly been mined, I think.
How about a Godzuki -1?
Oh,
I'll
get the meeting.
About that.
Wow.
Well, one thing I can say, when I was working for Playboy back in around 2005, I went to a grocery store close by to pick up something for the studio, and I ran into this cashier, and I just happened to be wearing a shirt, and I think it had some kind of Hanna-Barbera character on it. And he says, "Oh, Hanna-Barbera character." And I said, "Yeah, I like wearing this." And then he told me that for 20 years, he was an animator. He started out doing ink and paint for Hanna-Barbera. He worked there for 20 years. And he
Wow.
said it was the happiest time of his life. For
Wow.
20
There you
years, he
go.
worked at Hanna-Barbera, and he just
Wow.
loved every minute of it. And
Nice.
it was so great to hear that story. Yes, they had to make these things quickly. Yes, some of it was limited animation, but there was something very magical and special about the place.
Yeah.
That studio, the place where they did the animation, that was on Cahuenga. It was there for years.
It's still there. It's still
It's
there.
still
Wow.
there.
Wow.
But it's not the home of Hanna-Barbera anymore.
No, but
But
it is protected by the Los Angeles Conservancy. The building
Really?
itself.
Oh, wow.
Inside is all. In fact, there is space available. So if you guys want to pitch in together and space there,
Yeah.
there
Let's
are
do
The
it,
new
guys.
Monster Party Studio. Yeah.
Yeah.
there
They
we go.
have the annex to the left of it that was added later. That's an LA Fitness, and when I used to work out there, and before COVID, and I used to like to walk to the Starbucks that's on because you had to park behind the Hanna-Barbera building
Yeah.
underneath, and the Starbucks, they would get a nice tip from me if they knew what Hanna-Barbera was. Because I said, it's right. And that there's a nice little park there where the artists, where they go on their lunchtime, and they made
Yeah.
this goofball film where they were doing It's the Wolf and stuff. It's a lot of that is still, the building is still very magical to me.
That's
Because
cool.
I saw it on TV. You mentioned the previews. One of the very first ones was the World of Adamant and Secret Squirrel on NBC in '65, and Hanna-Barbera landed in a helicopter at the beginning. I mean, and you can't get this film. I don't know what happened to it.
Wow.
But it was a preview for what was going to be on the next day, and it was extremely exciting.
Wow. It's like, you hear so much all the time celebrating and the adulation over Disney Studios, and, maybe rightly so, but Hanna-Barbera, it needs to be up there too with, just, a renaissance of visibility again for all the Hanna-Barbera legacy, because it's incredible.
Well, and it's also, for me, it's a little more personal because it was, Disney, Warner Brothers. We had access to all this animation, but it was older. Hanna-Barbera was more current. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
felt more like it was my thing, like Rankin Bass.
Yeah, yeah.
You also had to, back in our day, you had to wait 7 years for a Disney film. You had to wait when there was animation on the Sunday show. And you'd have to go to the parks to see the characters. Whereas the Hanna-Barbera characters just seemed to be around more. They seemed more like close friends.
Yeah.
Right.
And the Disney ones were very special, relatives you saw on holidays or something.
Yeah. But Hanna-Barbera is in your home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hillbilly Bears, they were the Duck Dynasty.
Right.
Greg, I want to congratulate you on your new book. Sometimes a book comes out and it's just made for you. And Hanna-Barbera, The Recorded History, which just recently came out, I absolutely love, because I was it was before my time that a lot of these Hanna-Barbera labeled records came out. And I didn't find most of them. I had to find out about them later on in the internet or maybe in a specialty record store. But a lot of these were, Hanna-Barbera had their own record label. And some of them were soundtracks from the TV shows, but some of them were, the characters telling stories. Like Wilm Flintstone tells a story of Bambi, some random. And the cover art invariably is gorgeous on a lot of these. And what I love about the book is that you chronicle them to the nth detail, and also about the voice talents and the music talents behind each record. Some of them I owned. Peter Pan Records did Funky Phantom, the Hair Bear Bunch, and a Flintstone record in the early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I had all three of them. And I never thought for a moment of who those voice actors were, because they were not Dawes Butler, et cetera, but they were like New York voice actors because Peter Pan Records was out of New Jersey, things like that. So it's rich with all of these details. It's wonderful. And similar to your Disney Records one, which I also treasure, and which you kindly autographed for me when you were on our show last time. So congratulations. The detail in this is amazing. And it's not only about period records. It goes all the way up to, the more current Flintstone soundtracks and everything else. And you also do a chapter on Super Snooper and Blabbermouse meeting the Gruesomes in a record called Monster Shindig. And you name check our podcast because you call the chapter The Gruesomes Have a Monster Party.
Nice.
All
right.
So I don't know whether that was intentional, Greg, but I do thank you for that name check.
Well, I'm happy to do that. And I appreciate you saying that. That's very, very nice. I tried to, same with Mousetracks. You can't write a book about records and then just describe the records and expect people to want to read about records they may never listen to.
Right.
So you write about what they mean, what they did, why they were. And in the case of Hanna-Barbera, the challenge became, in a way, bigger because with Mousetracks, there are lots of books about Disney history, and we were covering an area that had never been covered. So we only had to bookend it with a little bit of background and then get into the record division. In the case of Hanna-Barbera, as you've been saying, their story, there's a biography of each of them, and there's a lot of beautiful, coffee table books. But there wasn't a comprehensive history for a really long time that kind of put it all together and then went on after we lost them. So I go past 2000 and go all the way up to 2021. And, Scoob had 2 soundtracks. They kept making, there's a lot of Scooby Doo recordings. And when you put them all together, I thought, well, there's going to be a couple of hundred. There's 500 recordings. More.
Wow.
Yeah. And from 1945 to 2021, but much more than that, there's a context around it of what the studio was, because there's just no way people would understand or care about the records without giving them. The records were just the vehicle, it turned out. I had no idea while I was writing this where it was going to go. And my wife was like, just write it. Write what's in your heart. Right? Don't worry about what people are if they're going to say it's about records or what. It ended up being about records and not being about them. Because the story, and as we said at the beginning, the story of what the name Hanna-Barbera means and what that umbrella means to those characters is a brand and is really important to be considered part of that brand. Because for a while, Cartoon Network put their name over Hanna-Barbera's, for a little bit. And so the generation didn't know, who was making them. And then Warner buying it, they don't lump them all together. Warner actually does distinguish them. And I think that they're, I have George Feltenstein on the podcast a lot, and he's very pleased. I think they want that entity to be something. I think a smart company wants strong brands. So
sure.
I think it's a good, healthy thing to have all that body of work, and then anything that it's based on that rolls out of it still fall under. I was thrilled. You know what I loved the most about those comics is they said Hanna-Barbera on them, the ones you were mentioning.
Right.
Because
yes. Yeah.
It was not always the case that their name was above again. And it's like, gosh, I'm so happy to see that. And that there's the British division of it. They went back to that HB logo with the lettering under Hanna-Barbera Productions underneath. That actually was resurrected for the European studio. So it's like, I feel like hopefully it'll happen again, that entity of what that is will fall under that name, because it's a very magical name and it's a very musical name and it bounces off the tongue.
Yeah.
So, Greg, this is your latest book. Can you tell me again the title of it and where listeners can go to get this book?
Called Hanna-Barbera, The Recorded History from Modern Stone Age to Meddling Kids. And it is published by University Press of Mississippi, just like Mousetracks was. Oh, and Tim Hollis worked on that with me. This was a solo flight. And the book is available pretty much at any retailer. It's on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and any place that there are books for sale. I'm working on maybe having some on eBay with signatures, but we're in the middle of a move, so I haven't had time to do that. But it's very easy to find, and Amazon has a slightly lower price on the paperback. There is an ebook And they are, as we speak, recording the audiobook. I had to go through, and I didn't know I'd have to do this. I had to go through the entire book and do a pronunciation guide.
Wow.
And write phonetically how to say the beautiful Calliope saxophia trombarumba claribasta trombophone.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, and you know what I left out? And my wife's like, you better let them know. I left out how to say Mr. Blah, 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 blah. So and then I wrote it out, but then I made a recording of every name that had an unusual spelling, and then you've got to figure everybody pronounces things wrong. Even the most simple name might, Pamela Ferdin, if they don't know who she is, Pamela, So I not only wrote it out, but I made a recording of me saying it like your Spanish lesson,
That's awesome.
Wow.
It's like escucha and repita.
It's igloo, the rock ape. It's not igloo, the rock ape.
Right.
Just remember that.
There's a lot of things. OG, they could say Ogie, but OG. So things like that, that was a bigger job than I expected it to be. But I'm glad they asked me to do it because they want to have a quality recording. But tomorrow I have to send Mr. Blah, blah, blah to them so that
That's awesome.
Great.
Well, Greg, again, we could go on and on because there's so much that we can talk about for Hanna-Barbera. Thank you so much for being with us.
Awesome.
I'd love to have you come back, as I know that we could talk about a lot of other Hanna-Barbera stuff too that we really didn't have time to get into.
And is the podcast still going on? The Fantastic World?
It's on every week. We've been on a year now. We've got about, we're coming up to, 40 or 50 episodes.
Nice.
And had some, and like you said, the gentleman was talking about how happy he was to work there. That's the overarching thing, is people really liked, there were ups and downs and stuff. Mm-hmm. But in general, it was a cool place to be because you could just walk around and the artists were there and that kind of thing. And some of the guests I got coming up, I have Teddy Eccles, who was the voice of the boy on the Herculoids.
Oh, Dorno.
Dorno, yeah. And,
wasn't he also like the little drummer boy?
Yes, and he tells a story about that.
Wow.
Recording that.
If they could do a Little Drummer Boy Herculoids crossover, that I want to see.
And throw in Captain Caveman too somehow.
Yeah.
So Greg, the name of the podcast again?
It is called The Fantastic World of Hanna and Barbera. And I do it Hanna and Barbera because it's about the two people, but also all the people. So it's not just about the company from 57 to 2000. It's about, all the way as far as we go way off into the weeds, because the whole idea is some of these folks worked there and then went on to incredible other things. And who knew, or were inspired by what they saw, like one of the guests I've had on more than one, Nick Ranieri, who is a master Disney animator. He animated Lumiere, Hades, Miko, and Pocahontas. I mean, this guy is he was one of the superstars of the Renaissance. Huge Hanna-Barbera fan, and it and he never worked there. But we just did a Salute to Johnny Quest show, and he produced the soundtrack CD.
Nice.
He assembled and he explained how he chose the thing. So that's the whole point I want to make, is even if, it doesn't matter when they were in operation, the influence and the interaction with other studios, people that went to Disney, people who came, when it came and went, they were in the heart of Hollywood, and so was the industry, and they were the industry for a long time. So it's very fun to do that. And so, yeah, if people want to listen to that'd be great. It's on all of the different streaming services, and please subscribe and write reviews and whatever.
It's a lot of fun. It's
Nice.
my new addiction. Well, Greg, this has been so much fun hanging out. It's been long overdue, and just to nerd out over Hanna-Barbera has just been a dream for the last couple
Awesome.
hours. So thank you so much for joining us. Very excited about the book. And let's raise our glasses and a toast to Greg EHRBAR and Hanna-Barbera.
Woohoo! Hanna-Barbera!
Yabba dabba doo!
Yabble dabble.
We're gonna get way out. Yeah, but yay.
Bug music.
Brad, where have you been?
Time for a listener shout out.
Shout out.
Shout
Gonna go
out.
shout out. Shout out. That's where the fun is. Shout out.
You know, I think I'm gonna throw it over to Sean.
Oh yes, we have
wow.
a great shout out. This goes to our good friend and listener April Whitney, who is the publicist for Chronicle Books.
Yes.
Now, if you remember in the past, April has sent us the Horror Oracle Tarot card
So good.
deck, all kind of based on classic monsters, and the classic horror movies calendar featuring classic monster films and horror flicks as a wall calendar.
Also beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. And she now just recently sent us, each of us, a copy of Chronicle Books' new book called Eerie Legends, an illustrated exploration of creepy creatures, the paranormal, and folklore from around the world.
Wow.
And this is an awesome book. We're sending it to you guys. It's a great hardcover book, and it's basically a beautifully illustrated look at all these different monsters from folklore and legend. It's the artwork is by Ricardo DeSenio. Who also did the artwork for the Horror Oracle deck set and the calendar, and it covers all the classic kind of mythical monsters like Banshee, the Chupacabra, the Mothman, Loch Ness Monster, etc., etc. And the cover glows in the dark.
Ooh, Larry?
Yes.
It glows in the dark.
That's right.
I love it. I'm a fan.
For each entry, it's like descriptions of the monsters and their history. Sometimes they have like short story excerpts and little fiction on them, and it's great. It's really cool. It's a great companion piece for a monster kid just to go through and look at all the supposedly real monsters in society. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, April.
Yeah.
You're always looking out for
April.
us. You're always sending us cool monster-related stuff. We love it.
Yes. Thank you, April. Just in time for Halloween.
Yes, and you can get this book on Amazon, or you can also get it at chroniclebooks.com. So check it out.
And Matt, I think you also have a shout out.
What? I do. Yes, I do. I would like to give a shout out to longtime friend of the show and Tonight Show favorite, Mark Pitta. Now, as you may know, aside from being a very talented comedian, actor, and TV host, Mark also is a huge fan of horror. And he likes to make great horror-related music videos for his YouTube channel. Now, his latest video, Jack the Ripper by the Sharks. Yes, Jack the Ripper by the Sharks was inspired by our recent Jack the Ripper episode.
That was a good episode.
With the great C. Courtney Joyner.
That's right.
Yes.
And we are honored that Mark Pitta dedicated this video to us. Yes.
Cool.
Now, the footage Mark has chosen for the video is chilling, and the music is by the band The Sharks, doing the classic rock song Jack the Ripper, written by Clarence Stacey, Charles Stacey, Walter Higgin, and Joe Simmons in 1961. Of course, my favorite version of the song is by shock rock pioneer Screaming Lord Sutch, released in 1963, but the Sharks definitely do this tune justice. So thank you, Mark Pitta, for this early Halloween gift. And if you want to see it, go to the Mark Pitta YouTube channel. You'll be glad you did.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mark.
Yes.
Also, yet another shout out to our good friend and listener, Jim Jenkins in San Diego. Jim is now the proud owner of a new Monster Party cap. This is probably the third or fourth one he's bought. So thank you, Jim. We appreciate your support. And of course, we always love seeing you when we're in San Diego.
Of course.
Next time.
Always. Such a talented man and such a great friend of the show and of ours.
That's
and
right.
it's a great cap. He should have more than three.
Cap.
That's
Yes,
right.
it
More
is.
than three.
Oh, and I have one extra tiny shout out, but it's an important one, and it is to whoever came up with the first sexy Velma costume.
I second that.
Agreed.
Oh, and one more thing. Hey, listeners, again, if you want to check out our commentary that we did for that really cool movie, Right Hand of the Devil, it is out now from Filmmasters. It also has Door to Door Maniac on it with Johnny Cash. But Right Hand of the Devil, man, that's what you want to see.
One of a kind movie.
Fun film. And we had a lot of fun doing that commentary. So go to Filmmasters, order that now because it is available.
Yes. And this movie really does have to be seen to be believed.
Yeah. You're in for a treat.
It is truly something unique.
Now, yes, the Monster Party cap is legendary. It's got billions of stitches embroidered on the front. And if you're wondering where you can get such a cap, so you and Jim Jenkins might, pal around together and look like twins in San Diego. Well, the answer to that is easy. You can find it on our eBay store, which is easy to remember. Monster Party Store on eBay. That's our vendor name. And you can also find the Monster Party t-shirts, Monster Party shot glasses, Monster Party PPE cloth masks, which people are still wearing. They're still wearing the masks. You see them around.
That cautious. Damn COVID.
And if you buy Monster Party merch on our eBay store and also happen to be a Patreon member, we will throw in free surprise goodies courtesy of our good friends Jason Lindsay at Biff Bang Pow Toys and foam fabber extraordinaire Ted Haynes.
Our HANNA and Barbera.
So this Patreon, it feels like every couple of weeks. I don't know. I'm just filled with so much Hanna-Barbera information lately. I just can't retain absolutely everything. Can you refresh my memory on this Patreon? What's this all about?
Well, not unlike the way the rhino-esque Herculoid monster Tundro fires energy rocks at foes, Patreon allows Monster Party to fire fun rocks at its fans. Fun rocks, as they're called, in the shape of exclusive bonus content. Now, we're talking special audio episodes, our shows like Monster Party Masterpieces, our continuing Toy Time series, behind the scenes convention footage, our famous Japan trip video diary, and vintage horror and sci-fi fiction edited by our own resident Lyscarian, John Bordeaux.
Well, that sounds wonderful, but I got to say, suddenly I'm inspired to go on eBay and get all these Hanna-Barbera albums, which are going to be kind of pricey. I don't know if I can afford this bounty. How much does it cost?
Okay, well, for the price you would pay for a dinosaur stripper to perform at the Water Buffalo Lodge, you could become a Monster Party patron, and that price is $5. $5 a month.
What?
That's pretty impressive. I mean, you can't get a vintage iron-on Jabberjaw patch for that price.
No. Double that amount.
Oh,
wow. Well, that is certainly affordable. How do I sign up?
Well, all you have to do is you go to patreon.com, you go to Monster Party, you click the join button, you follow the instructions, and next thing you know, you'll be as happy as the Super Friends after they accidentally killed Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog.
And speaking of super friends, we are on social media. We are on Facebook at Monster Party TV, YouTube with Monster Party TV, Twitter at Monster Party HQ, and also Instagram at Monster Party HQ. And hey, wherever you're listening to us, please take a moment, write a review. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and we will read them on the air.
And we won't just read your review. We'll read it in the style of the great Gazoo. Dum dum. On that note, I am Matt Weinhold.
I am Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James Gonis.
Keep America strong.
And watch anything by Hanna-Barbera.
This would have been a much better podcast if it weren't for those meddling kids.
Zoinks.
Good.
Here comes James.
Hey, Greg.
Great shirt.
Thank you.
See you.
And, look at you. You got your Fred Flintstone shirt on, as usual. Normally he does the whole costume, but today it's just the t-shirt.
I have a costume.
I'm sure I know you do. And where is that at Comic-Con? Thank you very much.
Larry actually got it for me for a birthday present.
Oh, that one. No, I want a realistic
Oh,
one.
a real one.
Because then I would do Wilma. That's how much I love you.
Oh,
I would do Joe Rockhead. No one would know,
Very inside baseball or inside bedrock.
We want to talk about this new thing that just come out for you, and we can plug your thing.
Do the full
And so
plug.
we'll ask,
you know.
yeah, the full plug. And it's like, where can we get this? And that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd like to-
Acknowledgements, thank yous.
Oh, sure.
And then
sure.
then the music will play and you'll know when to wrap up.
What is it? Mike Douglas used to do the thank you, Bob Goulet, for being my co-host.
That's hilarious. That's great.
no, we're gonna know when to wrap up when someone says, "Jane, stop this crazy thing."
Nice.
Steve
Very good.
Allen used to say that too.
Yeah. Wrap it up, dum dum. Sean, anything to add to this? That's Shawn Sheridan. If
Hey, Greg,
you
how's
might
it going?
remember him.
Hey,
All right, no, I'm ready to go. It sounds cool. It's a big topic.
It's a big topic.
Big topic.
Just like honeycombs is a big cereal,
Right.
which brings me right back to that.
yeah. It's not small.
No. Honeycombs got. Oh, I could go all night. We got to get in the car and drive someplace so we can all sing these songs. There's only a handful of people who will do this, as I'm sure you're aware of.
Yeah, Richard Foos he used to be at Rhino and went to Shout Factory. At my first meeting with him, talking about the records and all that stuff, he said, "You're one of the few people I've met who knows what you know and likes what you like, who doesn't frighten me."
Well, you're in good You're in good hands tonight because we also, James GONIS is our expert.
Yes,
our,
that's right.
our
But we
Hanna-Barbera.
love this stuff too,
But
No, I have a lot of affection for it. But Greg is certainly the expert.
well, yes, but amongst us little
Yes.
musketeers, you are. Look, you're even wearing a Fred Flintstone shirt. Look at
I've
that.
written some Hong Kong Phooey / fiction, but that's about all I can really contribute at this point.
I want to talk about Hong Kong Phooey.
I do want to
please.
talk about Hong Kong Phooey.
I think we all do.
Because I have some issues. I have issues with Hong Kong.
Do you now?
Phooey, but-
Only one?
Yes.
Okay.
Come on. Am I the only? I can't be the only one.
No,
can't
you're
win.
not. That was sarcasm, Larry. See, Greg, this is, doesn't it all, it's
Welcome
all
to our
coming back
show.
now, isn't it? Isn't it
Yeah.
like, oh, that's right, the guy who doesn't understand humor and then the rest of them.
No, we all understand humor. We
Do
like
we
to have
now?
a good time.
Okay, we're going to put it to the test.
That's why we're called Monster Party. It's not Monster Interview. It's Monster Party because we're going to have fun.
We are.
fun.
Because we're Mr. Fun.
That's right.
We're already having fun.
We are.
Are we? Are we, James?
I am.
Good.
I'm having a great time.
I'm
Sean,
thrilled.
I'm not sure about, but
Oh yes.
oh yes, we got the seal of approval. All right, so do you want it? We can start this at any
Let's do
time.
it.
Yes.
I'm ready to go.
Let's yabba dabba do it.
Let's
Greg,
do it. All right.
Do you have any questions before we get started?
What's the meaning of life?
No, we're not.
You know what?
We're not
Yeah.
going to go there.
I think we are going to go there
No,
because I think the HERCULOIDS really summed it up.
Oh, yeah.
I do.
did
lot-
they really?
Yes, yeah, no, there's a lot of subtext in
Well, that's
Igloo.
The meaning of life is to fight for your planet constantly,
Yeah.
Right.
every day, against hordes of marauders and aliens and constantly. There's never a day's rest for the Herculoids.
Mm-mm.
And if you've got a message, if you're going to attack life, you got to attack it as if you were the rhino thing on
Tundro.
on the Herculoid.
Tundro.
Zondro.
Zoc.
Tundro. Tundro.
Okay.
Tundro.
Okay,
Get it
look,
right.
Oh, yeah.
It's not-
Zoc was the flying thing.
It's Zoc, Igu, Tundro, and Gloop and Gleep.
I
Too
love
many
it.
names.
Thank God we have our Herculoids expert with us.
We
And
were
look,
all-
Yeah, I would love to.
Not
Yes.
everybody.
The greatest
here-
cartoon ever made.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes,
well,
Sean. Yes, but
I can't wait to hear this
One of them.
argument.
look, not everybody knows every single Hanna-Barbera production because there were many of them. We all
Yes,
have
there
our
were.
favorites.
Yeah.
Yes, we
You
do.
know, some we love
Right.
more than others. Some we
That's
may
true.
have never heard of, but that's why Greg is here to help guide us.
That's why this is going to be so much fun. Okay, so let's start it then.